In military intelligence, there's a concept called strategic camouflage, the art of hiding not by disappearing, but by becoming exactly what your enemy expects to see and therefore stops looking at closely. It's how spies survive in hostile territory, how assassins position themselves before the kill, how weapons disguise themselves as harmless until the moment they strike. For 2 years, the Silver Moon Club had employed perfect strategic camouflage in the form of an Omega waitress named Deanna. She performed submissions so convincingly that even trained warriors forgot she existed the moment she left their sight. Every downcast glance was calculated. Every soft-spoken word was tactical. Every moment of apparent weakness was a choice made by someone who understood that the best defense is never being recognized as a threat. Prince Elias had no formal military training, no intelligence background, no reason to recognize strategic camouflage when it served him drinks night after night. Tonight, that ignorance would cost him everything he thought he knew about power, hierarchy, and his own invincibility. This is the story of an operative so skilled that she convinced an entire pack she was harmless. And the moment when her mission parameters changed from remain hidden to tactical demonstration of capability. Before we deploy, signal your tactical awareness like this video if you can already predict what's about to happen to Prince Elias. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. The Art of Invisibility. The Silver Moon Club reeked of expensive whiskey, designer cologne, and the particular musk that clung to alpha wolves who measured their worth in territory conquered and rivals crushed. Blue LED lights cast shadows that softened edges and concealed sins, turning the cavernous space into something between exclusive nightclub and hunting ground. Deanna moved through the chaos like a ghost given temporary form. Her tray balanced with the unconscious grace of someone who had learned to navigate hostile territory without drawing predatory attention. 3 bottles of premium vodka, imported from the Northern Territories. 2 plates of Wagyu beef, still blood rare the way shifters preferred. And a bowl of the truffle pasta that passed for sophistication in establishments where power mattered more than taste. VIP Section 7, she murmured to herself, a habit developed during her first terrifying weeks when the faces of violent customers blurred together into an endless parade of potential threats. She had learned to catalog the dangerous ones, not just their faces but their patterns, their triggers, their particular brands of cruelty. Lord Stephen and his hunting party occupied Section 7 tonight, the one who had cornered Rosanna in the storage room last month until Gerard, the head of security, intervened. Stephen favored psychological torture over physical violence, preferring to make Omega staff squirm with verbal humiliation rather than outright assault. It made him slightly more predictable than some, though no less vile. Dina approached the curved leather booth with her gaze fixed on the polished marble floor, her posture carefully arranged in the submissive hunch that Omegas were expected to maintain around their supposed betters. "Your order, my lords," she said quietly, placing each item with practiced precision. "About damn time," Stephen growled, though his tone held more ritual complaint than genuine anger. "Thought you'd gotten lost between the bar and here, girl. My apologies for the delay, my lord." The kitchen was... Did I ask for explanations? Stephen's voice sharpened with the quick temper that made him dangerous despite his preference for psychological games. Omegas speak when spoken to, not to make excuses for incompetence. "Yes, my lord." Deanna stepped back, the precisely measured distance that indicated respectful availability without presumptuous hovering. "Will there be anything else?" One of Stephen's companions, a younger alpha, with the soft features that spoke of inherited wealth rather than earned respect, leaned forward with predatory interest. "You know, Stephen, I've always wondered. Do Omega wolves actually feel shame? Or do they simply mimic the emotion because they know it's expected?" The question was clearly designed to provoke a reaction that could then be weaponized for further torment. Deanna had heard variations dozens of times from alphas who viewed Omegas as curious specimens worthy of study only as objects of amusement. "Interesting philosophical question, Ricky," Stephen replied with false thoughtfulness. "Perhaps we should conduct an experiment." Deanna's muscles tensed imperceptibly beneath her long-sleeved uniform. This was how it started. Casual conversation that transformed into sport at Omega expense, with the victim expected to endure whatever followed for the entertainment of their supposed genetic superiors. She had perfected her performance over 2 years of careful survival. learning to move through crowds like mist through morning air. Never quite present enough to invite attention. Never quite absent enough to be accused of laziness. Her sleeves stayed long to hide the map of scars that told stories she could never speak aloud. Her voice stayed soft to avoid triggering volatile tempers, and her eyes stayed lowered to prevent anyone from seeing the depths they contained. For in those depths lived memories of another life, one where she had been called by a different name, where her hands had held weapons instead of serving trays, where her silence had been tactical choice rather than survival necessity. The woman who could disable 3 armed shifters before they could shift forms still existed beneath the waitress's carefully constructed facade, but she had learned to bury that part of herself so deeply that sometimes even she forgot it was there, until nights like tonight threatened to crack the mask. Actually, a new voice cut through the conversation like a blade through silk. I have a better experiment in mind. Every conversation in the nearby sections immediately stopped. Deanna felt her blood turn to ice as she recognized the voice that belonged to Prince Elias, heir to the Lunar Kingdom's throne and the most dangerous predator in a society built on predation. He approached their section with the loose-limbed confidence of someone who had never faced a threat he couldn't buy, intimidate, or kill. At 27, he possessed all the physical advantages of royal bloodline: height, strength, speed, and healing that made ordinary weapons little more than temporary inconveniences. But it was his complete lack of restraint that made him truly terrifying. Word traveled through Omega networks faster than wildfire. Prince Elias had put 2 Omega servers in the hospital last month after one accidentally brushed against him. The month before that, he'd gotten a bartender fired for making his drink too strong. His mood swings were legendary. His casual cruelty, routine. Prince Elias. Stephen rose quickly, his earlier arrogance immediately replaced by careful deference required when addressing royalty. An unexpected honor. Your Highness. Sit, Stephen. I'm not here for formal courtesies. Elias's golden eyes fixed on Deanna with focused intensity. I'm here because I overheard something amusing about conducting experiments on Omega staff. Deanna kept her gaze fixed on the floor, every instinct screaming warnings about the change in atmosphere that his presence had brought. Your Highness, Stephen said carefully. We were merely discussing philosophical questions about... Boring. Elias waved dismissively. Too much talking, not enough practical demonstration. If you want to understand Omega nature, you need to observe it under pressure. He turned his full attention to Deanna, his golden eyes taking in every detail of her appearance with the thoroughness of someone evaluating potential entertainment. What's your name? Deanna. Your Highness, she replied quietly, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her system. Deanna. He repeated her name as if testing its sound. Tell me, Deanna, do you consider yourself fortunate to serve in an establishment frequented by royal shifters? The question was a trap. Every possible answer carried potential for punishment. Express gratitude and risk seeming presumptuous. Express anything less and risk being accused of ingratitude. I am grateful for the opportunity to serve, Your Highness, Deanna said finally, choosing the response most likely to be considered appropriately humble. Grateful, Elias mused. How wonderfully conventional. But gratitude is such an abstract concept, don't you think? Perhaps we should test the depth of your appreciation through more concrete demonstration. The other alphas had gone quiet now, recognizing the shift from casual cruelty to something more calculated. When Prince Elias decided someone would provide his evening's entertainment, the results were rarely pleasant for his chosen target. Your Highness, Gerard's voice came from behind her, carefully neutral. Perhaps I could arrange for... Did I ask for your input, security? Elias didn't even look at the head of security. Unless you're volunteering to take her place in my little experiment? Gerard fell silent. Even he couldn't openly challenge royal authority without risking everything. Deanna had endured worse games than whatever was coming. She had cleaned floors with her own blood, accepted blame for damages she hadn't caused, smiled gratefully for the privilege of being allowed to continue existing in spaces where her kind were barely tolerated. She was preparing to accept whatever humiliation followed when Elias moved. Without warning, his boot connected with her shin, not hard enough to break bone through her supernatural healing, but with sufficient force to send her stumbling backward. The tray flew from her hands as she fought to maintain balance, sending bottles and plates scattering across the marble floor in a symphony of breaking glass and spilled liquor. Laughter erupted from the surrounding sections as Dina caught herself against a pillar, her leg throbbing from the impact and her carefully maintained composure finally beginning to crack. This was humiliation designed for maximum entertainment value, performed before an audience that would spread word of the evening's amusement throughout the capital's shifter elite. "There we are," Elias announced with satisfaction. Much more educational than philosophical discussion. Observe how quickly Omega gratitude transforms into something more honest when they're reminded of their proper place. But as Dina pushed away from the pillar and straightened to face her tormentor, something had changed in her posture, something that made the laughter die in several throats. Her head was no longer bowed in submission, her shoulders no longer curved in defensive hunching. When she looked directly at Prince Elias for the first time, her storm-gray eyes held depths that made even drunk alphas suddenly sober. "Your Highness," Deanna said quietly, her voice carrying a quality none of them had heard before. Not servility or fear, but controlled calm. Was that supposed to hurt? The question hung in the air like a challenge thrown down in a throne room. And Elias's expression shifted from amused superiority to something far more dangerous. Chapter 2. When silence becomes a weapon. The silence in the Silver Moon Club was absolute now. The kind of quiet that followed earthquakes or lightning strikes events so far outside normal experience that minds struggled to process what they had witnessed. And Omega had just spoken to Prince Elias with something that sounded dangerously close to mockery. Elias stared at Deanna for several heartbeats, his expression cycling through disbelief, outrage, and something that might have been anticipation. He was accustomed to immediate submission from Omegas, to groveling apologies and desperate attempts to avoid further punishment. Open defiance was something he encountered only from fellow alphas, and even then rarely, never from an Omega server in a nightclub. "Excuse me?" he said slowly, his voice dropping to the register that usually preceded extreme violence. Deanna smiled then. Not the forced expression of a servant trying to placate an angry alpha, but something altogether more predatory. "I asked if that was supposed to hurt, Your Highness. Because if it was, I think we need to have a conversation about expectations versus reality." Several alphas exchanged glances as they realized what was happening. This wasn't submission breaking under stress. This was something being revealed that had been carefully hidden. The difference was crucial and terrifying. "I think," Elias said, his voice carrying the particular calm that preceded his worst acts of violence, "that you've forgotten your place, Omega. Perhaps another reminder is in order." This time, his kick was aimed higher, and delivered with the full supernatural strength that royal bloodline provided. It should have doubled her over, should have sent her crashing into the wall with potentially serious injuries. Instead, she moved. The movement was so fast, so precise, that most of the watching crowd missed the actual mechanics of what happened. One moment, Prince Elias was launching a kick that could have shattered ribs. The next, he was face down on the marble floor with his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that suggested dislocated joints, and Deanna was kneeling beside him with one hand positioned at the base of his skull. The position was textbook. Military precision. The kind of restraint that required years of training to execute properly. "Here's the thing about expectations," Deanna said conversationally, as if she were discussing the weather rather than restraining the heir to the throne. "I spent 2 years learning yours. You expect Omegas to cower and apologize and beg for mercy when you decide to use us for entertainment." She applied slightly more pressure, and Elias's struggles immediately ceased as pain flooded through his nervous system. "You expect us to be helpless, harmless, forgettable." Her voice remained level, almost pleasant. "But sometimes, Your Highness, expectations can be dangerous things. Because when you expect helplessness, you don't prepare for competence. When you expect cowering, you don't guard against someone who was trained to kill before she learned to walk." The crowd had pressed back now, creating a circle of space around the unthinkable scene. Smartphones appeared, capturing video that would spread through social media within minutes. And Omega had not only defied royal authority but had disabled a royal alpha with effortless precision. "Now," Deanna continued, her tone remaining conversational despite the explosive tension radiating from every direction, We can handle this situation in several ways. I can release you. You can return to your table and we can pretend this was all a misunderstanding caused by too much whiskey and poor judgment. She let the alternative hang unspoken, but the implications were clear to everyone watching. Prince Elias was completely helpless in his current position, and the woman restraining him possessed skills that no Omega server should have been able to acquire. Or, she added quietly, we can discover what happens when someone finally pushes back against your casual cruelty. Your choice, Your Highness. Elias tried to speak, but the angle of his restraint made words difficult. What emerged was a strangled sound of rage mixed with something that might have been pain or shock. From the club's upper level, where private booths provided vantage points for the wealthiest patrons to observe without being observed, someone watched with calculating intensity. Alpha King Roman hadn't come to the Silver Moon Club tonight to witness his son's humiliation. He'd come to conduct quiet business with merchants who preferred to avoid palace scrutiny. But as he watched Deanna's precise movements, noted the professional economy of her restraint technique, and recognized the particular way she held herself, puzzle pieces began clicking into place. The scars she hid beneath long sleeves, the way she moved through crowds without quite touching anyone, the unconscious habits of someone accustomed to assessing threats and escape routes. And now, the combat skills that should not have existed in an Omega waitress working in a shifter nightclub. Deanna was not what she appeared to be. The question was whether her true identity made her an asset to be acquired or a threat to be eliminated. As if sensing the weight of royal attention, Deanna's gaze flickered upward toward the private booths where shadows concealed the king's presence. For just a moment, her eyes met his across the distance. And Roman saw recognition there, not of his face, which she had never seen up close, but of the authority he represented. She knew she had been seen by someone important. She knew her carefully maintained invisibility had been shattered beyond repair. And she knew that whatever happened next would determine whether she lived to see another dawn. But instead of fear or panic, what Roman saw in those storm-gray eyes was calculation. The cold assessment of a professional evaluating new parameters and adjusting strategy accordingly. The quiet servant was gone. And in her place stood something far more dangerous. Security, a voice called out one of Stephen's companions, finally finding courage now that the initial shock had worn off. Someone call security. This Omega attacked Prince Elias. Gerard appeared from the crowd, his expression carefully neutral as he assessed the situation. Behind him came 4 of his security team, their positions carefully coordinated to surround the disturbance without appearing overtly threatening. Miss, Gerard said carefully, his tone suggesting he was speaking to someone he recognized as professionally trained, rather than an out-of-control server. I'm going to need you to release His Highness. Dina's eyes tracked the security team's movements with professional interest, noting approach angles, weapon positions, and the particular way trained fighters moved when they were preparing for violence but hoping to avoid it. Gerard, she said, and her use of his first name rather than his title made several people blink. You and I both know what happens if I let him up right now. He'll either try to kill me immediately, or he'll have me arrested and killed later. Neither option appeals to me. If you harm him further, Gerard replied, there's no outcome where you survive the next 5 minutes. But if you release him now and cooperate, I can at least ensure you're treated fairly during questioning. It was the best offer he could make, and they both knew it. Gerard had always been decent to the Omega staff, one of the few security personnel who actually tried to protect rather than simply manage them. Dina was silent for a moment, weighing her options. Then, slowly, she began the careful process of disengaging from her restraint position. She moved with deliberate precision, each adjustment telegraphed clearly so that the watching guards could see she posed no immediate threat. But even her compliance demonstrated expertise. She maintained control throughout the release process, ensuring that Elias couldn't suddenly reverse their positions or launch retaliatory attacks. When Prince Elias finally rolled away from her and struggled to his feet, his face was flushed with humiliation and rage that transcended mere physical discomfort. His golden eyes blazed with the kind of fury that typically preceded lethal violence. You, he snarled, his voice rough from having been restrained, have made the gravest error of your miserable existence. Deanna rose gracefully to her feet, brushing debris from her uniform with movements that managed to suggest both humility and complete lack of concern about his threats. "Your Highness," she said respectfully, "I hope you weren't seriously injured during your fall. The floors here can be quite treacherous, especially after someone spills expensive vodka." The reframing was masterful. She had transformed his defeat from deliberate humiliation into an unfortunate accident, offering him a narrative that would preserve his dignity while making clear that she understood exactly what had happened. "Fall?" Elias's voice rose dangerously. "You think what just happened was a fall?" "I think what just happened was an unfortunate series of events that began when someone decided to use physical violence against a non-combatant," Dina replied calmly. "The specific details of how such situations resolve themselves tend to depend on the participants involved." She was giving him an exit strategy while simultaneously making clear that any escalation would be met with responses he might not survive. The message was delivered with perfect courtesy and absolutely unmistakable intent. Elias took a step toward her, his hands clenching into fists. But before he could close the distance, a new voice cut through the tension with the authority of absolute power. "That will be sufficient." Every head in the club turned toward the speaker, and a collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd as Alpha King Roman emerged from the shadows of the upper level. He descended the stairs with measured steps, his presence immediately transforming the atmosphere from dangerous confrontation to royal audience. Roman wasn't as physically imposing as his son, but authority radiated from him in waves that made even drunk alphas straighten their posture and lower their gazes. At 54, he possessed the kind of power that came not from inherited strength but from decades of making decisions that shaped kingdoms. "Father," Elias began, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and apprehension, "this Omega attacked me without." "I saw what happened," Roman interrupted quietly, his golden eyes so similar to his son's but infinitely more controlled, moving between Elias and Diana with calculating precision. "I observed the entire encounter from beginning to resolution." The simple statement carried implications that made several people in the crowd suddenly remember urgent business elsewhere. If the king had witnessed Prince Elias initiating violence against an Omega servant, then the official narrative of unprovoked attack became considerably more complicated. "Your Majesty," Diana said, dropping into a curtsy that was technically perfect while somehow managing to suggest that she was choosing to show respect rather than being compelled to do so. Roman studied her for a long moment, taking in details that his son had missed. The unconscious way she positioned herself to maintain sightlines to all potential threats. The careful neutrality of her expression that revealed nothing while observing everything. The particular stillness that marked someone accustomed to violence but comfortable with its absence. "Rise," he commanded, and Diana straightened to meet his gaze directly, another breach of protocol that somehow didn't feel like insubordination. "State your name and origin." "Dina, Your Majesty. I've served in this establishment for 2 years, previously worked in various positions throughout the kingdom." The response was factually accurate while revealing absolutely nothing of substance. A diplomatic non-answer that provided required information without offering details that could be used against her. Roman recognized the technique because he employed people trained in exactly this kind of verbal misdirection. "And where," he asked softly, "did you acquire the combat training that enabled you to disable a royal alpha?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Everything about Diana's story could be explained away except for the expertise she had demonstrated. Her answer would determine whether she was interrogated, recruited, or eliminated. Chapter 3. The Demonstration. Dina was silent for several heartbeats, her expression cycling through what appeared to be internal debate. The entire club waited, breath held, for her response to the king's question. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the careful selection of someone choosing words that would be technically truthful while strategically incomplete. "Your Majesty, I spent my early years in regions where Omegas required practical skills for survival. The specific details are less important than the general principle that one learns what circumstances require." "Regions," Roman repeated, his tone deceptively mild. "Which regions specifically?" "The contested territories along the eastern border, Your Majesty. During the period when territorial control was fluid." A chill settled over the gathered crowd as the implications registered. The eastern border conflicts had been brutal, involving multiple packs fighting for control over territory rich in resources that could fund private armies. Omegas caught in those regions had faced choices between fleeing, dying, or learning to fight with whatever advantages they could acquire. But the Eastern conflicts had also been where certain experimental programs had been conducted, training initiatives that officially didn't exist, designed to test whether Omegas could be developed into effective special operations assets. The programs had been discontinued after political changes made them inconvenient, and all records had supposedly been destroyed. If Diana was a product of those programs, her presence here represented far more than a server with unexpected skills. The Eastern border conflicts ended 7 years ago, Roman said carefully. All Omegas in those territories were relocated to approved settlement areas under Crown protection. There are no contested regions remaining. No, Your Majesty, Diana agreed quietly. There are not. The admission carried weight that went far beyond simple geographical facts. She was confirming that she had been in the contested territories during the conflicts, which meant she had either been involved in or witness to activities that certain parties preferred to keep buried. Roman made a decision that would reshape multiple lives before the night was over. Gerard, he said without taking his eyes off Diana, I want this woman placed in protective custody, pending full investigation into her background and potential security implications. Treat her as a person of interest rather than a prisoner, but ensure that she remains available for questioning. Your Majesty, Gerard replied immediately, though his expression suggested surprise at the classification. Private quarters in the east wing of the palace. Full security protocols, and access restricted to essential personnel only. Roman's tone made clear this was not a suggestion. I want complete background verification conducted immediately. Employment history, known associates, everything. He turned to address his son, whose expression had grown increasingly thunderous as he realized his humiliation was being treated as a matter of state security rather than personal grievance. Elias, you will return to the palace and report to the medical wing for evaluation. Any injuries sustained during this evening's entertainment will be properly documented for official records. The phrasing was carefully neutral, but the message was unmistakable. Prince Elias's version of events would be measured against medical evidence, and any discrepancies would become matters for further investigation. Father, you can't seriously be considering. I am considering the security implications of discovering that highly trained operatives are operating within our territory without proper oversight, Roman interrupted coldly. Your personal embarrassment, while noted, is secondary to matters of kingdom security. The rebuke was delivered with the particular precision that royalty reserved for family members who needed reminding of their priorities. Elias's flush deepened with combined humiliation and anger. But something else flickered in his golden eyes as he looked at Diana one final time before Gerard's security team began escorting them toward separate exits. Something that wasn't entirely rage or wounded pride. His wolf had stirred during the confrontation, not with the aggressive dominance that usually characterized his interactions with Omegas, but with something more complex. Recognition, perhaps, or interest that transcended simple hierarchy. The sensation disturbed him more than the physical defeat had. As guards moved to escort Diana from the club, Roman caught her eyes one final time. Miss Diana, he said quietly, using only her first name in a way that suggested he knew there was more to her identity than what had been shared. I suspect tomorrow's conversation will prove illuminating for all parties involved. Diana's slight smile suggested she was looking forward to the discussion as much as he was. I hope so, Your Majesty. I'm curious to see what your investigators discover. The East Wing quarters of the royal palace were comfortable by any standard, let alone by prison measures. Diana sat on the edge of a bed with actual silk sheets, in a room with windows that overlooked the palace gardens, and considered her options with the calm assessment of someone accustomed to rapid changes in tactical situation. Her 2-year masquerade was over, but that didn't necessarily mean her mission had failed. Sometimes the best way to infiltrate an organization was to let them capture you. And sometimes the person you most needed to reach was exactly the one who ordered your imprisonment. She had 3 problems now, listed in order of immediate threat level. First, Prince Elias. He would want revenge for tonight's humiliation, and he had resources that made personal vendettas dangerous for everyone involved. But there was something else there too, something in the way his scent had shifted during their confrontation. His wolf had responded to her in a way that suggested complications beyond simple enemy dynamics. Second, the inevitable investigation into her background. They would find the carefully constructed false identity that had sustained her cover for 2 years. But if they dug deeper, and they would, they might find traces of what she had been. What she had been trained to become. Third, and most dangerous, if word reached the wrong people that a Shadow Corps operative had surfaced in the capital, still alive after supposedly being terminated 7 years ago, then powerful figures would move to ensure she disappeared permanently this time. A knock on the door interrupted her strategic assessment. "Come in," she called, noting that the door wasn't locked from the outside. Protective custody, as promised, not imprisonment. Gerard entered, carrying a tray with food and water. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes held questions. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray on a small table near the window. "It's been quite a night." "That's an understatement." Deanna moved to the table, assessing the food with the automatic caution of someone trained to expect poison in convenient places. But Gerard had always been decent to the staff. If he wanted her dead, there were easier methods. "So," Gerard said, leaning against the wall with studied casualness, "you want to tell me how an Omega Waitress learned to put a Royal Alpha on the ground in under 3 seconds? Would you believe natural talent?" "No," Dina smiled slightly. "Didn't think so." "The King's investigators will be thorough," Gerard continued. "They'll find things, and depending on what they find, you'll either be recruited or eliminated. There's no middle ground with this level of security attention. I know. So the question is whether you want someone on your side when those investigators start asking harder questions." Gerard met her gaze directly. "I've been head of security at Silver Moon for 5 years. I've seen a lot of things I wasn't supposed to see, heard things I wasn't supposed to hear, and I've learned to recognize when someone is hiding in plain sight for good reasons versus bad ones. And which category do you think I fall into?" "I think you've been terrified every single day for 2 years," Gerard said quietly. "I think you've been waiting for someone to recognize you. And I think whatever you're running from scares you more than anything the King could do to you." It was the most accurate assessment anyone had made of her situation. Deanna found herself reassessing Gerard's perceptiveness. "If I tell you the truth," she said carefully, "you become complicit in knowledge that could get you killed. Are you sure you want that?" "I'm already complicit. The moment I realized you were something other than what you appeared and chose not to report it." Gerard's expression remained neutral. "So yes, I want the truth." Dina was silent for a long moment, weighing risks against potential advantages. Finally, she spoke. 7 years ago, there was a classified program called Shadow Corps. They took Omega children from the border conflict's orphans, mostly, and trained them to be intelligence operatives. Assassins, when necessary. The idea was that Omegas could infiltrate places that Alphas and Betas couldn't, because everyone underestimates us. Gerard's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "And you were part of this program." "I was their best graduate." There was no pride in Dina's voice, only flat statement of fact. 12 successful eliminations before my 18th birthday. Perfect record. 0 failures. What happened? The program was discontinued. Officially, for ethical reasons. Deanna's smile was bitter. Actually, because certain political factions realized that trained Omega operatives posed a threat to existing power structures, can't maintain rigid hierarchy if the lowest rank can kill the highest. So they terminated the program. They terminated the operatives. Deanna corrected quietly. All of us. One by one. Made it look like training accidents, mission failures, random violence. But I recognized the pattern, and I ran. And came here. To the capital, right under their noses. Best place to hide is where no one expects you to be. Deanna met his gaze directly. I've been surviving, Gerard. Staying invisible. Hoping they'd eventually stop looking. And then Prince Elias kicked you. And then I got tired of pretending to be helpless. Deanna finished. Which was strategically stupid. But apparently, 2 years of abuse has limits even for trained operatives. Gerard was quiet for a moment, processing the information. The king suspects something like this. That's why he's treating you as an intelligence asset rather than a criminal. I know. Which means I have a choice. Try to run again, or offer him something valuable enough that protecting me becomes worth the political complications. You have information about the people who terminated the program. Names, financial records, proof of treason that reaches into the highest levels of multiple pacts. Deanna's voice was steady. The question is whether King Roman is the kind of ruler who wants to know when his government is corrupt, or the kind who prefers comfortable lies. He's the former, Gerard said with certainty. Which means you might actually survive this, if you play it right. And if I play it wrong? Then at least your death will be quick. Roman doesn't tolerate betrayal, but he's not needlessly cruel. Gerard moved toward the door. Get some rest. Tomorrow's interrogation will determine your future. You'll want to be sharp. Gerard. Dina called as he reached the door. Thank you. For the food. And for not running straight to the king with what I just told you. Thank me when this is over. Gerard replied. Assuming we both survive what's coming. After he left, Dina lay back on the silk sheets and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing through scenarios and contingencies. Tomorrow, she would face Alpha King Roman and either secure protection or seal her fate. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, she slept without keeping one eye on the exits. Sometimes surrender was the bravest tactical choice available. Chapter 4. Royal Interrogation. Dawn crept through the narrow window of Deanna's quarters like a reluctant witness, casting pale light across furniture that was far too elegant for someone who might not survive the day. She had spent the night in careful meditation, preparing for conversations that would determine whether she lived to see another sunset or disappeared into the kind of unmarked grave that swallowed inconvenient secrets. A soft knock came precisely at 8 in the morning. Miss Diana. A formal voice called through the door. His Majesty requests your presence. She opened the door to find not Gerard, but Captain Aaron, one of the king's personal guards, his bearing suggesting someone who took royal assignments with utmost seriousness. Behind him stood 2 additional guards whose positioning indicated they expected potential resistance while hoping to avoid violence. Captain, Dana said calmly, I'm ready. Aaron's expression flickered with something that might have been respect. Most people facing interrogation by the Alpha King showed more fear. If you'll follow me, please. They led her through palace corridors that spoke of centuries of wealth and power. Marble floors polished to mirror brightness. Tapestries depicting famous battles. Portrait after portrait of previous rulers, their golden eyes seeming to track her passage with ancestral judgment. The room they brought her to was smaller and more intimate than she expected, not a throne room, but a private study designed for sensitive discussions. Alpha King Roman sat not on any throne, but in a chair beside a table covered with documents, his informal positioning suggesting conversation rather than interrogation. Lord Commander Leonard stood at attention nearby, his expression carefully neutral despite the obvious tension that filled the room. Whatever information had been gathered during the night, it had clearly raised questions that extended far beyond a nightclub incident. Miss Diana, Roman said as she was escorted to a chair across from him. Thank you for joining me. I trust your accommodations were adequate. Very comfortable, Your Majesty. Thank you. Dina settled into the chair with perfect posture, not the hunched submission of an Omega, but the straight-backed confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose by being herself. Far superior to what I've grown accustomed to. Yes, about that. Roman leaned forward slightly, his golden eyes studying her with the intensity of someone solving a complex puzzle. My investigators conducted thorough inquiries into your background overnight. They discovered some interesting discrepancies. He gestured to the documents spread across the table. According to official records, you have indeed worked as a server in various establishments throughout my kingdom for the past 2 years. References are excellent. Work history consistent. No incidents of misconduct or inappropriate behavior reported. I'm gratified that my employers found my service satisfactory, Your Majesty. Indeed. However, what's fascinating is that prior to 2 years ago, Deanna simply didn't exist. No birth records, no family history, no documentation of any kind until the day you appeared at the Silver Moon Club seeking employment. Roman selected a specific document from the pile. More intriguing still, the description of your combat skills provided by multiple witnesses matches techniques taught in classified military programs that were officially discontinued 7 years ago. The trap was expertly laid, offering her multiple opportunities to lie while making clear that he already knew more than she might expect. Deanna considered her options carefully before responding. Your Majesty, I think we both understand that sometimes official discontinuation and actual termination are different things, and sometimes people acquire new identities because their old ones became inconvenient. Inconvenient for whom? For anyone who preferred that certain activities remain buried along with the people who participated in them. Roman nodded slowly, recognizing the careful way she was confirming his suspicions without providing specifics that could be used against her. Tell me about the Shadow Core program. Deanna's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture that suggested the conversation had moved into genuinely dangerous territory. I'm not familiar with that specific designation, Your Majesty. No? Roman's tone remained mild. Interesting. Because according to classified files that required significant effort to locate, the Shadow Core was an experimental initiative designed to train Omega operatives for deep infiltration and assassination missions in rival pack territories. The program supposedly produced 12 successful graduates before being terminated due to political concerns. He leaned back in his chair, studying her reaction. Those files also indicate that all program participants were declared dead to maintain operational security. Their original identities buried so deeply that no trace would remain if they were captured or compromised. That sounds like a very thorough approach to operational security, Your Majesty. It does, doesn't it? Roman's eyes never left her face. Of course, declaring someone dead for security purposes doesn't actually kill them. It simply makes them extremely difficult to trace. Which raises interesting questions about how many supposedly dead operatives might be living under assumed identities throughout my kingdom. Deanna remained silent, recognizing that anything she said now would either confirm his theory or force her to maintain lies that were becoming increasingly untenable. The thing is, Roman continued, his tone shifting slightly to become less interrogative and more collaborative, I've been wondering why a highly trained operative would choose to spend 2 years serving drinks to drunk alphas when her skills could be employed for far more lucrative purposes. Unless, of course, the server position wasn't employment, but positioning. Positioning for what, Your Majesty? That's what I'm hoping you'll tell me. Because if you've been conducting surveillance on my kingdom for 2 years, then you either represent a threat I need to eliminate or intelligence I need to acquire. Roman's expression shifted to something almost resembling a smile. And frankly, after watching you handle my son last night, I'm more interested in the latter possibility. The shift in approach was masterfully executed, transforming the interrogation from threatening to potentially advantageous. Deanna found herself reassessing her tactical position, as she realized the king might be offering recruitment rather than punishment. Your Majesty, may I speak frankly? Please do. The Shadow Core program was indeed discontinued 7 years ago, but not because of ethical concerns about Omega assets. Deanna chose her words with surgical precision. It was terminated because certain political factions within various pack governments discovered that trained Omega operatives posed potential threats to established power structures. Can't maintain rigid hierarchy if the lowest rank can kill the highest. She paused, watching his reaction. The official story claims all operatives were declared dead for security purposes. The reality is that most were actually killed to prevent them from becoming problems for their former handlers. A chill settled over the room as the implications registered. If Deanna was telling the truth, then classified military assets had been murdered to cover up political convenience, and her survival suggested either remarkable skill or protection from unexpected sources. How many survived? Roman asked quietly. I don't know, Your Majesty. Operational security meant we never knew each other's identities or assignments, but I would estimate very few of us escaped the termination orders. And your mission here? What were you supposed to accomplish during 2 years of server work? Deanna was silent for a long moment, her internal debate visible in the way she weighed responses that could either damn or save her. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone making a decision that couldn't be reversed. I wasn't assigned to this kingdom, Your Majesty. I came here because it was the only territory where I might be safe from the people who wanted me dead. She met his gaze directly. I've been hiding in your clubs and establishments because no one would think to look for a supposedly dead operative in plain sight among Omega servers. Safe from whom specifically? From the political faction that ordered the program's termination. From military commanders who didn't want their unauthorized experiments exposed. From court officials who profited from arrangements with enemy packs during the border conflicts. Deanna's voice remained level despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. From everyone who had something to lose if a trained operative started talking about what she knew. Roman exchanged a glance with Lord Commander Leonard, whose expression had grown increasingly grave during Deanna's revelations. Can you prove these allegations? I can provide names, dates, financial records, and operational details that would expose activities your enemies would kill to keep buried. Deanna's voice was steady. The question is whether your Majesty considers such information valuable enough to justify protecting someone who officially doesn't exist. Roman leaned back in his chair, processing implications that extended far beyond a nightclub incident. If Deanna was telling the truth, then his kingdom had been harboring conspiracies that reached into the highest levels of multiple governments, and she represented both the key to exposing them and evidence that needed to be silenced. What would you require in exchange for this information? Official protection under Crown authority. A new legal identity that can't be traced back to the program. An assurance that I won't be terminated once I'm no longer useful. And what guarantee do I have that you're not simply an extremely skilled operative sent to infiltrate my court through elaborate deception? Deanna smiled for the first time since the interrogation began. Your Majesty, if I were conducting a deep infiltration operation, would I have revealed my capabilities by publicly humiliating your heir? Wouldn't it have been more effective to maintain my cover and continue gathering intelligence from a position where no one suspected my true nature? The logic was unassailable. Exposing herself to defend against a drunk prince was exactly the kind of emotional response that trained operatives were conditioned to suppress, which suggested either terrible tradecraft or genuine provocation beyond professional tolerance. Show me, Roman said suddenly. You claim to have information that could expose treason within multiple pack governments. Show me something that proves you have access to intelligence worth the risk of protecting you. Deanna nodded and rose from her chair, moving to the table where documents were spread. May I, Your Majesty? At his gesture of permission, she selected a specific file and opened it to reveal financial records that documented military procurement during the eastern border conflicts. Lord Commander Mikhail, former head of the Western Pac's military forces, authorized payments to 3 different weapons suppliers during the height of the fighting, she said, pointing to specific entries. What those records don't show is that 2 of those suppliers were actually fronts for enemy operations, and that a significant percentage of purchased weapons never reached your allied forces. She traced connections between different documents with practiced ease. The missing weapons were diverted to enemy units who used them against allied soldiers. Mikhail received substantial payments for facilitating these diversions, payments that were laundered through accounts connected to the Shadow Corps operational budget. Lord Commander Leonard moved closer to examine the documents, his expression darkening as he recognized the implications. You're saying Mikhail was selling weapons to our enemies while soldiers died? I'm saying that Mikhail and others used the chaos of the border conflicts to profit from arms sales to multiple sides, and that they eliminated the operatives who could expose their activities when the wars ended and investigations became possible. Roman studied the documents she had indicated, cross-referencing information that painted a picture of systematic betrayal extending over several years. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling, suggesting patterns of corruption that reached into multiple branches of Allied Pac military commands. Where did you get this information? He asked carefully. Shadow Corps operatives were used to facilitate some of these transactions. Deanna replied quietly. We moved the money, made the connections, ensured discretion. They thought we were just tools, expendable, forgettable, easily eliminated when we became inconvenient. They didn't consider that tools sometimes keep records. Insurance, in case our employers decided we knew too much. Roman made a decision that would reshape the political landscape of multiple territories. Lord Commander Leonard, I want immediate investigation into these financial discrepancies. Full audit of all military procurement from the past decade, with particular attention to irregularities during the border conflicts. Yes, Your Majesty. And I want discreet surveillance placed on anyone connected to these transactions. If Miss Deanna's allegations prove accurate, then we're dealing with treason that could have cost thousands of lives. He turned back to Deanna, his expression suggesting she had passed some crucial test. You'll remain in protective custody while we verify this information, but your status is now officially that of intelligence asset rather than prisoner. Captain Aaron will arrange more appropriate accommodations and security protocols. Thank you, Your Majesty. Don't thank me yet. Roman's voice carried warning beneath the formal courtesy. If your information proves accurate, then you'll be helping expose conspiracies that certain powerful people have killed to protect. That makes you extremely valuable and extremely dangerous, a combination that rarely leads to peaceful outcomes. As guards prepared to escort her to new quarters, Roman spoke her name one final time. Miss Deanna, you should know that my son is extremely displeased about last night's events. He's been making inquiries about your background and expressing opinions about appropriate responses to public humiliation. The warning was clearly delivered despite being diplomatically phrased. I understand, Your Majesty. Do you? Because Prince Elias has never learned the value of strategic patience, and he has access to resources that make personal vendettas dangerous for everyone involved. Deanna's smile was sharp and entirely confident. Your Majesty, if your son wishes to continue our discussion from last night, I'll be happy to provide additional demonstrations of why underestimating one's opponents leads to educational experiences. But as she was led from the study toward quarters that represented safety she hadn't known in 7 years, Deanna couldn't shake the memory of how Prince Elias's scent had shifted during their confrontation. Rage and humiliation, yes, but underneath, something else. Something that made her wolf silent for so long stir with uncomfortable awareness. Recognition. Chapter 5. Bonds forged in fire. The new quarters were less prison and more luxury suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the palace training grounds, where elite guards practiced combat formations. A private bathroom with marble fixtures. Shelves lined with books. And most importantly, a door that locked from the inside. Deanna stood at the window, watching the guards below move through drills that she recognized from her own training. Different variations, perhaps, but the fundamental principles were identical. Block, parry, redirect. Use an opponent's strength against them. Never fight harder when you could fight smarter. A knock interrupted her observation. It's open, she called, though she'd already identified the visitor by scent. Alpha. Male. Younger. Attempting to mask nervousness with confidence. Prince Elias entered without waiting for further invitation, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. He'd changed from last night's club attire into training gear, black pants, and a fitted shirt that emphasized the physical advantages of royal bloodline. His golden eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made the air feel charged. We need to talk, he said, his voice carrying the command of someone unaccustomed to being refused. Deanna turned from the window slowly, assessing threat levels with automatic precision. He wasn't armed. His posture suggested anger rather than immediate violence. But his scent carried something complex underneath the rage, something that made her wolf stir with uncomfortable awareness. Your Highness, she said calmly. I'm surprised the guards let you through. I'm the Crown Prince. Guards don't let me do anything. Elias moved deeper into the room, maintaining distance but claiming space with typical alpha territorialism. Besides, Father's so busy with his investigations that he hasn't thought to restrict my access to palace quarters, an oversight I'm sure he'll correct once he realizes you're here. Maybe. Elias's jaw tightened. Or maybe he'll understand that I deserve answers before anyone else. You humiliated me in front of half the capital's elite, Deanna. Video of my defeat has been shared thousands of times across social media. My own guards are whispering about whether the prince is too weak to handle a single Omega. Deanna remained silent, recognizing that he needed to vent before any actual conversation could occur. So yes, Elias continued, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. We're going to talk, and you're going to tell me exactly who and what you are, not the sanitized version you gave my father. The truth. And if I refuse, then I'll make your protective custody significantly less comfortable. It wasn't an idle threat. Despite his defeat, Elias still held considerable power within the palace hierarchy. I can make your life very difficult, Deanna. Or I can be an ally. Your choice. Dina considered her options. Elias was volatile, proud, and nursing a wounded ego that made him unpredictable. But he was also the crown prince, which meant his support could prove valuable if when the conspirators she'd exposed came seeking revenge. And there was that other factor, the one she'd been trying to ignore since last night. The way her wolf had responded to his proximity during their confrontation, the way his scent affected her even now, making her hyper-aware of his presence in a way that had nothing to do with threat assessment and everything to do with something far more complicated. "Sit down, Your Highness," she said finally, gesturing to a chair near the window. "If we're going to have this conversation, we might as well be civilized about it." Elias looked surprised by her acquiescence but moved to the indicated chair. Deanna remained standing, maintaining the tactical advantage of mobility while he was seated. 7 years ago, she began without preamble. I was recruited into a classified program called Shadow Corps. I was 14. An orphan from the eastern border conflicts with no family, no connections, no one who would miss me if I disappeared. Elias's expression shifted from anger to something more focused, listening now rather than just venting. They trained 23 of us initially. By the time the program was discontinued, only 12 remained. The others couldn't handle the conditioning, or they died during training exercises that were designed to be lethal if you weren't good enough. Training exercises that killed children, Elias said slowly, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been horror. We weren't children. We were weapons being forged. Deanna's tone remained flat, clinical. And yes, some of us broke during the forging process, but those of us who survived became very, very effective at what we were designed to do, which was infiltration, intelligence gathering, assassination when necessary. She met his gaze directly. We were Omegas, which meant we could access places and people that Alpha and Beta operatives couldn't. Everyone underestimates Omegas, Your Highness. It's our greatest tactical advantage. Elias was silent for a long moment, processing information that clearly challenged his understanding of pack hierarchy and Omega capabilities. "How many?" he asked finally. "How many people did you kill? Is that really what you want to know? Or are you asking something else?" "How many?" he repeated, his voice harder now. 12 confirmed eliminations before my 18th birthday. All of them validated targets engaged in activities that threatened kingdom security. Dina's voice didn't waver. "I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed either. I did what I was trained to do, what I believed was necessary to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. And then the program was discontinued. Officially for ethical reasons. Actually because certain powerful people realized that trained Omega operatives were a threat to the existing power structure." She moved to the window, looking out at the training guards below. "Can't maintain rigid hierarchy if the lowest rank can kill the highest, as I told your father. So they tried to eliminate all of you. They succeeded with most of us. I survived because I recognized the pattern before they got to me. I've been running ever since." Deanna glanced back at him. "Until last night, when you kicked me and I got tired of pretending to be helpless." Elias rose from his chair, moving to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Close enough that his scent pine and winter air and something uniquely him made her wolf respond with interest she couldn't quite suppress. "I didn't know," he said quietly. And for the first time since entering, he sounded almost uncertain about any of this. The program, the terminations, the conspiracy. "If I had known there were Omegas being trained and then murdered to cover up political convenience, what would you have done?" Dina asked, genuinely curious. "You're a crown prince. You benefit from the system that treats Omegas as lesser. Would you really have challenged it?" "I don't know," Elias admitted. "But I'd like to think I would have tried." They stood in silence for a moment, both watching the guards below practice formations that suddenly seemed inadequate compared to what Deanna could do. "Why didn't you kill me?" Elias asked suddenly. "Last night. You could have. Easily. But you restrained me instead of ending the threat permanently. Why?" It was a good question, One Deanna had been asking herself since the confrontation. Because killing you would have made me exactly what they tried to turn me into, a weapon without conscience or choice. She turned to face him directly. I've done enough killing for causes I believed in, Your Highness. I'm not interested in adding corpses just because someone bruised my pride. It was more than your pride I bruised. Yes, you humiliated me in front of a room full of people who already view Omegas as worthless. You used physical violence because you were bored and I was convenient. Deanna's voice hardened slightly. But you're also young, arrogant, and have never been told no in your entire privileged life. Killing you for being what the system made you seemed excessive. Elias flinched at the assessment, but he didn't deny it. For what it's worth, he said after a moment. I'm sorry. For kicking you. For the humiliation. For being exactly the kind of entitled alpha asshole that makes Omegas like you have to learn to fight just to survive. The apology surprised her. Deanna had expected defensiveness, justification, or renewed anger. Not genuine remorse. Apology noted, she said carefully. Though you should know that pretty words don't erase actions, Your Highness. I know. Which is why I'm going to do more than apologize. Elias's expression shifted to something determined. Whatever investigation my father launches, whatever conspirators come crawling out when you expose their crimes, you'll have my support. Full protection of the Crown Prince's authority. Why? Yesterday you wanted me dead for embarrassing you. Today you're offering protection. What changed? Elias was silent for a long moment, his golden eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her increasingly aware of how close they were standing. My wolf recognized something in you, he said finally, his voice dropping to something more intimate. During our fight. Something that made all my rage and embarrassment feel secondary to something else. Deanna's breath caught as she understood what he was implying. What her own wolf had been trying to tell her since last night. No, she said firmly, taking a step back. Whatever you think you felt. We're not mates. Elias finished, the word hanging between them like a blade. That's what you're refusing to acknowledge, isn't it? That your wolf responded to mine the same way mine responded to yours. It doesn't matter what our wolves think they feel, Deanna said, though her voice lacked its earlier certainty. You're a crown prince. I'm a supposedly dead operative with a target on my back. Even if the mate bond were real, which I'm not conceding, it would be the worst possible timing. Agreed, Elias said, though something in his expression suggested he wasn't dismissing the possibility as easily as she was. Which is why we're going to ignore it for now. Focus on keeping you alive long enough to expose the conspiracy. Deal with the political fallout. And then we figure out what to do about the fact that my wolf has claimed an Omega assassin as its mate, and your wolf apparently feels the same way. His smile was wry. Should be interesting, at minimum. Before Deanna could respond, rapid footsteps sounded in the corridor outside. Gerard burst through the door without knocking, his expression urgent. Deanna, we have a problem. 3 operatives just entered the palace grounds using stolen security credentials. His eyes flicked to Elias. Your Highness, you should leave. Now. What kind of operatives? Deanna asked, though she already knew the answer from Gerard's expression. The kind trained by Shadow Corps, Gerard replied grimly. They're coming for you. And they're not planning to take you alive. Chapter 6. Treason in the Throne Room. Deanna's training kicked in before conscious thought could interfere. She moved to the window, assessing the grounds below with tactical precision while her mind raced through defensive options. How many guards between here and the main entrance? She asked Gerard, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. 12 on duty. But if these operatives are Shadow Corps trained, regular palace guards won't slow them down much. Gerard moved to stand beside her, his hand resting on his sidearm. We need to get you to the secure vault in the sub-basement. Reinforced steel, limited access points. A trap, Deanna interrupted. Limited access means limited escape routes. They'll corner me there and wait me out. She turned to face both men. How long until they reach this wing? 5 minutes. Maybe less if they're not worried about being subtle. Then we don't have time for elaborate plans. Deanna's mind shifted into the cold calculation that had kept her alive for 7 years. Your Highness, you need to leave. Now, if they find you here with me, it creates complications we can't afford. I'm not leaving you to face 3 trained assassins alone, Elias said flatly, his alpha authority making the statement non-negotiable. You're not trained for this kind of combat. You'll be a liability, not an asset. Deanna's bluntness made him flinch, but she didn't soften it. Gerard can handle himself in a fight. You can't. Not against Shadow Corps operatives. She's right, Your Highness, Gerard added reluctantly. The best thing you can do is alert the king and get reinforcements here as fast as possible. Elias looked between them, his pride warring with tactical reality. Finally, he nodded sharply. 5 minutes. If reinforcements aren't here by then, I'm coming back whether you want me to or not. He moved toward the door, then paused. Don't die, Dina. We still have things to figure out. After he left, Gerard turned to her with grim assessment. So what's the actual plan? Because I know you're not planning to just wait here for them to arrive. We let them come, Dina said, moving away from the window to assess the room's tactical advantages. But we control the engagement. How they enter, where the fight happens, what advantages we can leverage. She pointed to the door. That's the obvious entry point, which means they'll expect us to defend it or flee through it. Instead, we let them come through, channel them into a confined space where their numbers become a disadvantage rather than an advantage. Gerard's expression showed professional respect. You want to use the room itself as a weapon? Exactly. 3 operatives means they'll likely enter in formation, 1 lead, 2 flanking for mutual support. The lead will be their best fighter, expecting resistance at the door. Deanna moved furniture with quick efficiency, creating angles and obstacles that would disrupt coordinated movement. We let the lead pass, then separate them. Divide their formation, force them to fight as individuals, rather than as a team. And if they just blow the door and come in shooting? Shadow Corps doesn't train for loud. We're infiltration specialists, not assault teams. They'll want this quiet, surgical. Deanna positioned herself behind a heavy bookshelf that provided cover while maintaining sightlines to multiple approach vectors. They're coming to eliminate a liability, not start a war in the royal palace. Gerard took position near the bathroom entrance, his service weapon drawn but held low. You seem very calm for someone facing assassination. This isn't the first time someone's tried to kill me, Gerard. It's not even the first time this week. Dina's smile was sharp. The difference is that this time, I'm not pretending to be helpless. Footsteps approached in the corridor outside, soft, measured, professional, 3 sets. Moving with the coordinated precision of trained operators, they stopped outside her door. Dina held up 3 fingers to Gerard, confirming the count, then signaled the formation she expected. He nodded, understanding. The door handle turned slowly, unlocked, as she'd left it. An invitation they wouldn't be able to resist. The door swung open. The lead operative entered with fluid grace, female, mid-20s, moving with the particular economy of motion that marked Shadow Corps training. Behind her came 2 more, spreading to flanking positions with practiced coordination. All 3 wore civilian clothes that wouldn't attract attention in palace corridors. No visible weapons, which meant they were relying on hand-to-hand combat and concealed blades. Standard Shadow Corps operational doctrine for sensitive targets in secure locations. The lead operative's eyes swept the room, cataloging positions and threats with automatic precision. When her gaze landed on Deanna, something flickered in her expression. Recognition. Hello, Lara, Deanna said quietly, using a name she hadn't spoken in 7 years. It's been a long time. Lara Richardson had been in Dina's training cohort, one of the 12 who survived to graduation. They'd run missions together, covered each other in hostile territory, shared the particular bond that formed between people trained to kill before they were old enough to vote. Dina. Lara's voice carried no warmth despite their history. You should have stayed hidden. This could have been avoided. Could it? Or were you always going to come for me eventually? Dina remained in position, her posture relaxed but ready. The question is whether you're here because you want to be, or because they're making you. Does it matter? Lara gestured slightly, and her companions spread wider, boxing Deanna in from multiple angles. The order is clear. You exposed yourself. You're talking to the king. You've become a liability that needs to be eliminated. Who gave the order, Lara? Who's still pulling Shadow Core strings 7 years after the program was supposedly terminated? You know, I can't tell you that. Can't? Or won't? Deanna's eyes tracked all 3 operatives simultaneously, calculating strike ranges and reaction times. Because I think part of you wants me to know, wants me to understand why you're still taking orders from people who murdered our sisters. Something flickered across Lara's face pane, quickly suppressed. They didn't murder anyone. Training casualties happen in elite programs. Training casualties. Dina interrupted, her voice sharp. Is that what they're calling it? Rosanna didn't die in training, Lara. Neither did Frida or Catherine. They were systematically eliminated after the program was discontinued because they knew too much. And now you're here to do the same thing to me. It doesn't have to be difficult. Lara said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. Come quietly. We'll make it quick. Painless. Better than what happens if you resist. Better than what happens if I fight back, you mean? Deanna's smile was cold. But here's the thing, Lara. I'm tired of running. Tired of hiding. And I'm definitely tired of letting people who trained us to be weapons decide when and how we die. Gerard chose that moment to reveal his position, his weapon trained on the nearest operative. You should also know that palace reinforcements are 90 seconds out. Whatever you're planning to do, you need to do it fast. The 2 flanking operatives tensed, recognizing the tactical complication. 3 against 2 were acceptable odds. 3 against 2 plus reinforcements was a losing proposition. Your call, Lara, Deanna said quietly. We can do this the hard way, where some or all of us don't walk out of this room, or you can tell me who sent you, and we can figure out together why we're still taking orders from people who view us as disposable. Lara was silent for a long moment, internal conflict visible in the way her shoulders tensed. Finally, she spoke. Commander Luella, she said quietly, and both her companions turned to stare at her with expressions of shock. She's the one still running Shadow Core operations. She survived the official termination and went underground, maintaining control over the operatives she could still reach. Deanna felt puzzle pieces clicking into place. Commander Luella Jimenez had been their primary instructor during training, the woman who had shaped them from traumatized orphans into efficient killers. She'd supposedly died in a training accident 5 years ago, a convenient death that had never quite seemed real. Where is she operating from? I don't know exact locations. She moves constantly, using secure communication networks that can't be traced. Lara glanced at her companions, who looked increasingly uncertain about their mission. But she has connections throughout multiple pack governments, people in positions of power who benefit from having trained operatives they can deploy without official oversight. Like the people who profited from weapons dealing during the border conflicts, Deanna said, connecting threads. The ones who needed Shadow Corps eliminated because we could expose their treason. Yes. And now that you've talked to King Roman, given him evidence of the conspiracy. Lara's expression was grim. Luella will move against anyone who might corroborate your testimony. That means any surviving Shadow Corps operative becomes a target for elimination. Including you. Dina said quietly. Including all of us, Lara confirmed. Which is why we need to. The door burst open again, this time with explosive force. Captain Aaron entered with 6 palace guards, weapons drawn and trained on the 3 operatives. Nobody move. Aaron's command carried absolute authority. By order of Alpha King Roman, you are all under arrest for unauthorized entry to palace grounds and attempted assassination of a crown asset. The 2 flanking operatives tensed, preparing to fight their way out. But Lara raised her hands slowly, signaling surrender. Stand down, she told her companions. We can't fight our way through palace guards and reinforcements. Mission failed. As guards moved to secure the operatives with specialized restraints designed to hold trained fighters, Lara caught Deanna's eyes one final time. She'll come for you herself now, Lara said quietly. Luella doesn't tolerate failure. And she definitely doesn't tolerate betrayal. If you've exposed the conspiracy, she'll view you as the primary threat. Let her come, Dina replied. I've been running from shadows for 7 years. Maybe it's time to drag them into the light. As the operatives were escorted from the room, Prince Elias appeared in the doorway, flanked by Lord Commander Leonard and a full security detail. "Are you hurt?" Elias's eyes swept over her with concern that seemed excessive for someone he'd met only yesterday. "I'm fine." They didn't get a chance to engage. Dina moved away from her defensive position, adrenaline beginning to fade now that immediate danger had passed. "But we have bigger problems. Commander Luella is alive and still running Shadow Corps operations from underground. She's connected to the conspiracy, and she'll be coming for anyone who can expose it. Then we need to find her first," Roman said, entering the room with the authority that made everyone instinctively straighten. "Miss Deanna, it seems your information is proving accurate faster than I anticipated, which means we need to accelerate our investigation before our enemies consolidate their position." He glanced at the 3 captured operatives being led away. "And we need to determine which of these women can be turned into assets rather than liabilities. If Commander Luella is eliminating her own operatives, some of them might be motivated to cooperate in exchange for protection." "Lara will cooperate," Deanna said with certainty. "She's tired of being a weapon. She just needed permission to stop fighting." Roman studied her thoughtfully. "You seem very certain of that." "She was my friend once, before they trained friendship out of us." Deanna met his gaze directly. "People don't forget who they were before they became what others needed them to be, Your Majesty. Sometimes they just need a reason to remember." "Then let's give them that reason," Roman said decisively. "Lord Commander, I want full interrogation of all 3 operatives. Promised protection in exchange for intelligence on Commander Luella's operations and the conspiracy network. And I want Deanna present during questioning. She'll recognize lies they try to tell you." As plans were made and security protocols adjusted, Deanna found herself standing beside Prince Elias near the window where they'd stood earlier. "You were right," he said quietly. "I would have been a liability in that fight." "Yes, you would have." Dina didn't soften the truth. "But you got reinforcements here in time. That matters too. My father's going to accelerate his timeline now. Move against the conspirators before they can regroup." Elias's voice dropped lower. "Which means you're going to be at the center of a political war that could reshape multiple pack governments." "I know. And the mate bond we're both pretending doesn't exist. That's going to complicate everything even more." Deanna turned to face him directly. "One problem at a time, Your Highness. First, we survive the assassins and expose the conspiracy. Then we figure out what to do about the fact that our wolves are apparently insane." Elias's laugh was short but genuine. "Fair enough. But for the record, my wolf has excellent taste, even if its timing is terrible." Before Deanna could respond, Gerard approached with urgent news. "You need to see this," he said, holding up a tablet displaying a video feed. Security cameras caught something during the operative infiltration. Someone inside the palace helped them get past the outer checkpoints. The video showed a palace official, someone with high-level security clearance, disabling sensors and providing access codes to the Shadow Corps team. "Who is that?" Roman demanded, moving to examine the footage. Gerard's expression was grim. "Lord Alberto Hand, Your Majesty, your chief administrative advisor." The implications rippled through the room like a shockwave. If Lord Alberto was compromised, then the conspiracy reached into the king's own inner circle. The war was about to become very personal. Chapter 7. The Hunters Arrive. Lord Alberto Hand had served as chief administrative advisor to the crown for 12 years. His reputation was impeccable, his loyalty unquestioned, and his access to sensitive information absolute, which made his betrayal all the more devastating. "Secure him immediately," Roman commanded, his voice carrying the cold fury of a king who had just discovered treachery in his own household. "I want him in interrogation within the hour. Full security protocols treat him as hostile and extremely dangerous." Captain Aaron departed with half the security detail to execute the arrest. The remaining guards formed a protective perimeter around the king, their expressions suggesting they were reassessing everyone they'd previously trusted. "Your Majesty," Lord Commander Leonard said carefully, "if Lord Alberto is compromised, we need to assume that everything he had access to is now known to our enemies. Strategic plans, security protocols, intelligence assessments, everything," Roman agreed grimly. which means we're operating in a compromised environment against enemies who know our defensive capabilities and response procedures. He turned to Dina with calculating assessment. You trained for deep infiltration operations. How would you exploit this situation if you were Commander Luella? Deanna considered the question with professional detachment, viewing the problem through the lens of operational strategy rather than personal danger. The operative team that just failed was a probe, not a serious assassination attempt, she said, her tactical analysis making several people in the room shift uncomfortably. 3 operatives against palace security? That's acceptable risk for testing response times and defensive capabilities, but not sufficient force for guaranteed elimination of a high-value target. So, the real attack is still coming, Elias said, understanding the implication. The real attack is already here, Deanna corrected. Lord Alberto wasn't just providing access, he was positioning assets. If I were planning this operation, I'd have embedded additional operatives inside the palace weeks or months ago, using his authority to bypass security screenings. People in positions where they could strike at critical moments. Roman's expression darkened as he processed the tactical reality. You're saying there could be multiple Shadow Corps operatives already inside the palace, and we have no way to identify them until they act. Not quite no way, Deanna said slowly, an idea forming. Shadow Corps training is distinctive. We move differently, assess threats differently, maintain situational awareness that regular palace staff wouldn't have. Someone who knows what to look for, could identify the patterns. Someone like you, Gerard said. Someone like me, Deanna agreed. And like Lara. If she's willing to cooperate, she could help identify any other operatives Luella embedded here. Assuming Lara is genuinely cooperating and not feeding us false information, Lord Commander Leonard pointed out. There's a way to test that, Deanna said. Let me talk to her alone. No guards, no observers, just 2 former Shadow Corps operatives having a conversation. If she's still loyal to Luella, she'll try to kill me. If she's genuinely done with being a weapon, we can work together. Absolutely not, Elias said immediately. You're asking us to put you in a room alone with someone who came here to assassinate you. I'm asking you to trust that I can handle myself and assess whether Lara is an asset or a threat. Dina met his concerned gaze steadily. This is what I was trained for, Your Highness. Reading people, identifying lies, building operational intelligence from limited information. Let me do what I'm good at. Roman studied her for a long moment, weighing risks against potential benefits. You'll be monitored through security cameras. At the first sign of violence, guards will intervene. Fair enough, Dina agreed. And if she does try to kill you? Gerard asked. Dina's smile was sharp and confident. Then your guards will have an instructional demonstration of Shadow Corps combat techniques. Either way, you'll learn something valuable. 20 minutes later, Deanna sat across a metal table from Lara in one of the palace's secure interrogation rooms. The space was deliberately austere, bare walls, minimal furniture, nothing that could be weaponized by creative prisoners. Lara's hands were secured with specialized restraints designed to limit movement without causing damage. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Deanna could read the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes tracked every movement with automatic threat assessment. They're watching us, Lara said quietly, her gaze flicking toward the camera mounted in the corner. Of course they are. I'm a valuable intelligence asset, and you're a captured operative. They'd be stupid not to monitor this conversation. Dina leaned back in her chair, projecting relaxation she didn't entirely feel. But they can't hear what we're saying if we keep our voices low. The microphones in here are good, but not that good. It was a calculated lie. The surveillance system could absolutely hear them, but Lara didn't need to know that. Why did you tell them about Luella? Dina asked. You could have maintained operational security, refused to cooperate. Instead, you gave up intelligence that could get you killed. Lara was silent for a long moment, internal conflict visible in the tightness around her eyes. Because I'm tired, she said finally. Tired of taking orders from someone who views us as disposable assets. Tired of killing people I don't even hate for causes I don't fully understand. Tired of being afraid that every mission might be the one where I'm the target instead of the operative. She's been eliminating people, hasn't she? not just the operatives who refuse to cooperate after the official termination, but anyone who might become unreliable. Last month, she ordered me to kill Marianne, Lara said quietly, naming another member of their training cohort. Said Marianne was showing signs of instability, talking about wanting to leave the operation. I was supposed to make it look like an accident. Did you? I told Luella it was done. Then I helped Marianne disappear with a new identity and enough money to start over somewhere far from here. Lara met Deanna's eyes directly. I'm not the weapon they trained me to be anymore. I don't know what I am, but I know I'm done killing my sisters for someone else's political convenience. Deanna felt something tight in her chest, loosen slightly. This was the truth. She could hear it in Lara's voice, see it in the way her posture had shifted from defensive to almost pleading. If you help us find Luella and expose the conspiracy, King Roman will grant you protection, Deanna said. New identity, relocation, whatever you need to actually disappear this time. But we need everything you know, operational procedures, communication protocols, locations where Luella might be operating, and the other two who came with me tonight. Same offer. Cooperation gets them protection and a chance to stop being weapons. Deanna leaned forward slightly. But we need to know, are there other operatives already inside the palace? Did Luella embed assets using Lord Alberto's access? Lara hesitated, the conflict clear in her expression. This was the intelligence that could either save lives or get her killed if Luella discovered the betrayal. 3 more, she said finally. Embedded over the past 6 months in positions that give them access to the royal family. I don't know their cover identities. Operational security meant we never shared that information, but I know their target assignments, which are: 1 is assigned to King Roman, 1 to Prince Elias, and 1. Lara's voice dropped even lower. 1 is assigned to you, Deanna, specifically instructed to eliminate you if the initial assassination attempt failed. The information hit like physical impact. 3 trained assassins, already positioned, waiting for the right moment to strike at the highest value targets in the kingdom. How will they execute? Deanna asked, her tactical mind immediately shifting to defensive planning. That's the thing about Shadow Corps training, Lara said grimly. We're taught to be creative, adaptive. They won't follow predictable patterns or use standard methods. Each operative will assess their target's vulnerabilities and exploit whatever weakness presents the best opportunity. So we're looking for 3 needles in a haystack, and we don't know what the needles look like or when they'll strike. Essentially, yes. Deanna rose from her chair and moved to the door, knocking twice to signal the guards. When Gerard entered, she spoke with quiet urgency. We have a situation. 3 more Shadow Corps operatives are already inside the palace, assigned to eliminate the king, the prince, and me. We need to implement maximum security protocols immediately. Gerard's expression shifted from professional calm to controlled alarm. How reliable is this intelligence? Reliable enough that I'm betting my life on it, Deanna replied. And yours? And everyone else's in this building. Within minutes, the palace transformed into a fortress under siege. Guards doubled at every checkpoint. All staff were subjected to immediate background verification. The royal family was moved to secure locations with restricted access. And Deanna found herself in a conference room with King Roman, Prince Elias, Lord Commander Leonard, and Gerard, planning defensive strategies against enemies who could be anyone. The problem, Roman said, studying security layouts spread across the table, is that we can't simply lock down the entire palace indefinitely. Government functions must continue. Diplomatic meetings must be held. Court business must be conducted. If we appear paralyzed by fear, our enemies win even if they never execute their attack. Then we turn defense into offense. Deanna said, an idea crystallizing. We don't wait for them to strike. We force them to reveal themselves by creating situations where they have to act or abort their missions. You want to use yourself as bait, Elias said flatly, his expression making clear his opinion of that plan. I want to use all 3 primary targets as bait, Deanna corrected. Controlled exposure in environments where we can monitor every approach, vector, and response. If the operatives are watching, and they are, they'll have to make decisions about whether to act or maintain cover. And if they choose to act? Leonard asked. Then we'll be ready. With Lara's cooperation, we can anticipate Shadow Corps tactical approaches, set up countermeasures that turn their own training against them. Roman studied the proposal with the calculating assessment of someone who had survived decades of political intrigue through careful risk management. It's dangerous, he said finally, but it has the advantage of initiative. We choose the time and place of engagement rather than waiting to be attacked at their convenience. Father, you can't seriously be considering. Elias began. I'm considering that we're already under attack. We just haven't felt the blade yet, Roman interrupted. Miss Dina is offering us a way to see the blade before it strikes. That's worth considerable risk. He turned to Deanna with an expression that mixed respect and concern. What do you need to make this work? Lara's full cooperation in planning the operation, access to palace security systems, and freedom to position myself where the operative assigned to eliminate me will have the best opportunity to try. You're talking about deliberately making yourself vulnerable, Gerard said, his tone suggesting he thought she was insane. I'm talking about controlling my vulnerability rather than having it exploited at the enemy's timing, Dina replied. There's a difference. Before Roman could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the palace, the specific pattern that indicated perimeter breach. Captain Aaron's voice came through the emergency communication system, tight with stress. Security breach in the East Wing, medical section, multiple casualties. Suspect fled toward the royal quarters. All units respond. The attack had already begun. And as Deanna raced toward the medical wing with Elias and palace guards, her tactical mind was already processing implications. The medical section was where Lord Alberto had been taken for questioning after his arrest. If he was dead now, it meant the conspiracy was eliminating its own compromised assets, which meant the remaining operatives would be accelerating their timeline. The hunt had become a race against enemies who were always 3 steps ahead. Chapter 8. The Infiltration. The medical wing looked like a war zone. 2 guards lay motionless on the floor, their throats cut with surgical precision. A nurse slumped against the wall, still breathing but unconscious from what appeared to be a precise strike to a nerve cluster. And in the center of the carnage, Lord Alberto sat in his interrogation chair with his head tilted at an unnatural angle, his neck cleanly broken, dead before he could reveal anything useful. Seal the wing, Captain Aaron commanded, his guards immediately moving to secure all exit points. No one leaves until we've identified every person who was in this section during the attack. Dina knelt beside the fallen guards, checking for signs of life even though she already knew what she'd find. The cuts were too precise, too efficient. Shadow Corp's technique designed to kill instantly and silently. Single operative, she said quietly, her professional assessment cutting through the shocked reactions of the palace guards. Entered through the ventilation system, based on the dust patterns near that grate. Eliminated the guards first to prevent alarm, then killed Lord Alberto before he could be questioned. Exit route likely the same as entry back through the vents before security could respond. How do you know all that from looking at bodies? One of the younger guards asked, his voice shaky. Because it's exactly how I would have done it, Dina replied flatly. Shadow Corp's doctrine for elimination of high-value targets in secure facilities. Fast, silent, untraceable. Prince Elias moved to stand beside her, his expression dark with controlled rage. So one of the 3 embedded operatives just executed a member of my father's inner circle inside the royal palace, and we have no way to identify who did it. Not quite no way, Deanna said, rising from her examination of the scene. Whoever did this had to know exactly where Lord Alberto was being held, which means they had access to real-time security information. That narrows our suspect pool significantly. Gerard was already pulling up personnel records on his tablet. Everyone with access to security feeds during the relevant time frame. That's 43 people, palace guards, administrative staff, medical personnel. Cross-reference that with anyone who's been hired or transferred to new positions in the past 6 months, Dina interrupted. Shadow Corps embeds need time to establish cover identities and integrate into their environments. They wouldn't risk using someone who just started last week. The list narrowed to 27 names. Still too many to investigate individually before the next attack, Leonard said grimly. Then we force their hand, Deanna replied, her tactical mind shifting from reactive to proactive planning. We announce that Lord Alberto survived the attack, and is prepared to provide testimony about the conspiracy. That creates urgency for the remaining operatives. They'll have to act quickly before their entire network is exposed. You want to lie about Lord Alberto's death? Aaron asked, clearly uncomfortable with the deception. I want to create a situation where our enemies make mistakes because they're operating under time pressure rather than careful planning, Dina clarified. Lord Alberto is already dead, but if the operatives don't know that, they'll scramble to complete their missions before he can talk. Roman had arrived during this exchange, his expression grim as he surveyed the carnage. Miss Dina's strategy is sound. We announce that Lord Alberto survived the assassination attempt and is under maximum security while recovering. That forces the conspirators to either risk another attempt on a hardened target or accelerate their timeline for the primary missions. And while they're scrambling, Deanna continued, we set up our controlled exposure scenario. Create opportunities for the operatives assigned to you, Prince Elias, and me to make their attempts under conditions we control. Bait traps using the royal family, Leonard said slowly. It's extremely risky, Your Majesty. Everything is risky at this point, Roman replied. The question is whether we accept defensive risk and wait to be attacked, or offensive risk and force engagement on our terms. He turned to Deanna with calculating assessment. You'll coordinate with Lara to design the operational parameters. I want detailed plans for each exposure scenario, including response protocols and contingency measures. We execute within 24 hours, before our enemies can adapt to the new security posture. Yes, Your Majesty. As the meeting dispersed and personnel began processing the crime scene, Elias caught Deanna's arm gently, guiding her away from the crowd to a quieter corner of the corridor. I don't like this plan, he said without preamble, his golden eyes intense with concern that seemed excessive for their brief acquaintance. You're putting yourself directly in the path of someone trained to kill you. I've been in that path for 7 years, Your Highness. At least this time I see them coming. That's not reassuring. Elias's hand was still on her arm, his touch warm even through the fabric of her sleeve. The mate bond, whether we're acknowledging it or not, makes it very difficult for me to be objective about strategies that use you as bait. Dina felt her wolf stir at his proximity, responding to the concern and protectiveness that shouldn't matter but somehow did. She gently extracted her arm from his grip, needing physical distance to maintain tactical clarity. Then be subjective, she said quietly. Be angry that someone wants to kill me. Use that anger to make sure the security protocols are flawless. Channel protective instinct into practical preparation rather than trying to talk me out of the only strategy that gives us initiative. You're asking me to help plan an operation that deliberately puts you in danger. I'm asking you to trust that I know what I'm doing. That 7 years of survival against people trained to kill me means I'm very good at not dying. Deanna met his gaze directly. And I'm asking you to understand that I'd rather face this threat on my terms than spend another 7 years running from shadows. Elias was silent for a long moment, internal conflict visible in the tension of his jaw. Finally, he nodded once, sharply. Fine, but I'm part of the security detail for your exposure scenario. Non-negotiable. You're a primary target yourself. You should be focused on your own security, not mine, which is why we coordinate. Your operative and mine might be the same person for all we know, or they might be planning a coordinated strike. Elias's expression shifted to something more tactical, the crown prince taking precedence over the concerned mate. Either way, we're stronger together than separated. It was sound, tactical reasoning, even if Deanna suspected his motivations were more emotional than strategic. But she was too practical to refuse an advantage just because the person offering it had complicated feelings about her continued existence. All right, she agreed. We plan the exposure scenarios together, but you follow my lead on Shadow Core tactics. Agreed. Agreed. 3 hours later, Dina sat in a secure planning room with Lara, Gerard, Prince Elias, and Captain Aaron, designing what amounted to an elaborate trap using 3 of the kingdom's most important people as bait. The key to Shadow Corp operations is adaptability, Lara explained, pointing to schematics of various palace locations spread across the table. We're trained to assess environments and identify vulnerabilities that standard security wouldn't anticipate. So, your exposure scenarios need to appear to have exploitable weaknesses while actually being controlled kill zones. Give me an example, Aaron said, his professional interest overcoming his clear discomfort with the entire concept. Standard security thinking focuses on perimeter defense, Lara replied. Guards at doors, cameras monitoring approaches, restricted access to sensitive areas. Shadow Corps training teaches us to bypass all of that by exploiting unconventional vectors, ventilation systems, maintenance corridors, supply deliveries, anything that gets us inside the security perimeter without directly confronting guards. So we need to make our bait scenarios look like they have those exploitable vectors, Deanna said, understanding the approach. But actually, those vulnerabilities are monitored and prepared for immediate response. Exactly. Lara pointed to a specific location on the palace map. The Royal Library, for instance. It has extensive ventilation systems for climate control of rare books. Standard security views those vents as too small for infiltration. But Shadow Corps operatives are trained in contortionist techniques that allow access through spaces most people would consider impossible. So we stage a meeting in the library, Gerard said, following the logic. Make it look routine but actually have teams positioned at every vent access point. Not just positioned, Deanna corrected. Waiting with weapons designed to incapacitate rather than kill. We want to capture these operatives alive if possible. They have intelligence we need. Elias studied the library schematics with a professional eye that suggested he'd actually paid attention during his tactical training. What about the operative assigned to my father? The king rarely operates in locations with obvious vulnerabilities. He's too experienced to be caught in amateurish security lapses, which is why we create a vulnerability that seems unintentional, Lara said. A last-minute schedule change due to urgent business. A meeting in a location that hasn't been fully secured yet because of the rushed timing. Something that forces the operative to act quickly on limited planning. My father won't appreciate being used as bait, Elias said. Your father suggested this entire strategy, Deanna reminded him. I think he understands the necessity. They spent the next 2 hours refining the operational plans, identifying specific locations and scenarios for each exposure, coordinating security responses, and planning contingencies for various ways the operations might develop. By the time they finished, Deanna's respect for Lara's tactical mind had increased significantly. The woman wasn't just a trained killer, she was a strategic thinker who understood complex operational planning. There's one more thing, Lara said as the meeting was concluding. Commander Luella will know something's wrong when she doesn't receive confirmation that Lord Alberto was successfully eliminated. The operative will report the kill, but Luella will want verification. When she doesn't get it when she realizes we're feeding false information, she'll adapt her strategy. Meaning what? Gerard asked. Meaning she might come herself, Lara said quietly. Luella doesn't trust anyone else to clean up failures of this magnitude. If her embedded operatives are compromised and her conspiracy is being exposed, she'll want to personally ensure the threats are eliminated. The implications settled over the room like a cold weight. Commander Luella wasn't just their enemy's coordinator, she was potentially the deadliest threat they faced. A woman who had trained dozens of lethal operatives and survived when most of her program was terminated. Then we plan for that contingency too, Roman said, having entered the room silently during the final stages of their planning. If Commander Luella comes to the palace personally, we'll be ready to receive her. He moved to the table, examining the operational plans with an experienced eye. These are solid. We execute tomorrow evening during the diplomatic reception. Multiple high-value targets in controlled locations with plausible security vulnerabilities. Perfect conditions for forcing our enemies to act. And if they don't take the bait? Aaron asked. Then we adjust and try again, Roman replied. But I don't think that will be necessary. We've killed their intelligence asset, announced he survived, and created urgent timelines. They'll act because waiting becomes more dangerous than striking. As the meeting dispersed and personnel moved to implement the complex security arrangements, Deanna found herself alone with Elias in the corridor outside the planning room. Tomorrow night, this ends, he said quietly. One way or another. Probably. Deanna agreed. Though I've learned not to assume anything ends cleanly when conspiracies and assassination attempts are involved. The mate bond, Elias said abruptly, as if he'd been holding the words back and they'd finally burst free. After this is over, assuming we both survive, we need to address it. Actually address it, not keep dancing around the reality that our wolves have claimed each other. Dina's first instinct was to deflect, to maintain the professional distance that had kept her alive for 7 years. But something in his expression, vulnerability beneath the princely authority, made her pause. "One crisis at a time," she said finally, her voice softer than intended. "Tomorrow, we survive assassination attempts and expose a conspiracy. Then we figure out what to do about the fact that I'm a supposedly dead Omega operative and you're a crown prince, and somehow our wolves think that's a perfect match." "Fair enough." Elias's smile was brief but genuine. "But for the record, my wolf is very insistent that you're worth whatever complications come with claiming an Omega assassin as mate." Before Deanna could formulate a response that wasn't either sarcasm or unwanted honesty about her own wolf's opinions, Gerard approached with urgent news. "We have a problem." One of the names on our suspect list, a junior administrative assistant who had access to security feeds, didn't report for her shift this evening. Her quarters are empty, personal belongings gone. "She ran," Dina said immediately. "Realized we were tightening security and decided abort was safer than exposure. Or she's positioning for tomorrow's operation," Lara said, having followed Gerard from the planning room. "Shadow Corp's doctrine includes contingencies for going to ground before major operations. Makes you harder to track and gives you flexibility for unexpected opportunities. Either option was troubling, but Deanna's tactical instincts suggested the latter. "We proceed as planned," she said decisively, with the added assumption that at least one operative is now operating outside palace surveillance, which means security tomorrow needs to account for external approaches as well as internal threats. The complexity was increasing, but complexity created opportunities for the skilled and prepared. Tomorrow would prove whether they were skilled and prepared enough. Chapter 9. The Full Moon Betrayal. The diplomatic reception was scheduled for precisely the wrong night or the perfect one, depending on perspective. Full moon. When shifter instincts ran hottest, control became difficult, and the line between civilization and primal nature blurred dangerously. It was tradition to hold major court events during full moons, a demonstration of the royal family's mastery over their wolves even when lunar pull made restraint challenging. It also made security exponentially more complicated. Dina stood in her assigned quarters, adjusting the formal attire that had been provided for the evening's event. The dress was elegant but practical deep blue silk that allowed full range of motion, with strategic reinforcement that could stop a blade without being obvious to casual observers. A knock interrupted her preparation. "Come in," she called, recognizing Lara's scent. The former Shadow Corps operative entered carrying a small case, her expression serious. "Final equipment check before the operation. I brought some items that might prove useful." She opened the case to reveal an array of tools that standard palace security would never have provided. Concealed weapons, communication devices, emergency medical supplies, all designed for covert operations rather than diplomatic receptions. "The king approved these?" Deanna asked, examining a particularly sophisticated blade that looked like decorative jewelry but could deploy lethally in under a second. "Lord Commander Leonard approved them after I explained Shadow Corps operational equipment," Lara replied. "He's pragmatic enough to understand that fighting Shadow Corps operatives requires Shadow Corps resources." Deanna selected several items, concealing them about her person with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd worn hidden weapons for years. The familiar weight was oddly comforting, a reminder that she was no longer pretending to be helpless. "How are you holding up?" Lara asked quietly, her tone shifting from professional to something more personal. "This isn't just another mission for you. These are people trying to kill you specifically, and you're deliberately making yourself vulnerable." "I've been vulnerable for 7 years," Dina replied, meeting her former sister's gaze directly. "Tonight, I'm just honest about it. That's not the same thing." "No, it's not." Dina finished her preparations and turned to face Lara fully. "But I'm tired of running, tired of hiding, and I'm definitely tired of letting Luella and her conspiracy determine how I live my life. Tonight ends that, one way or another." Lara nodded slowly, understanding visible in her expression. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you survived long enough for me to stop being the person they trained me to be. Having you alive makes it easier to believe that we're more than just weapons." The moment of vulnerability was interrupted by Gerard's arrival, his formal security uniform making him look even more imposing than usual. "Time to move," he announced. "Reception begins in 20 minutes. All primary targets need to be in position before guests start arriving." As they made their way through palace corridors toward the grand ballroom, Diana's tactical mind catalogued every detail: guard positions, camera angles, exit routes, potential ambush points. The full moon pull made her wolf more alert, her senses sharper, her awareness heightened to levels that would have been exhausting to maintain under normal circumstances. But tonight wasn't normal circumstances. The grand ballroom was stunning crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across polished marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of moonlit gardens, tables arranged for optimal traffic flow and social interaction. To untrained eyes, it looked like any formal diplomatic event. To Diana's tactical assessment, it was a carefully constructed kill zone disguised as elegant entertainment. Prince Elias stood near the western entrance, formally dressed and projecting princely authority despite the tension visible in his shoulders. When his eyes found Dina across the ballroom, something shifted in his expression, concern mixed with something more possessive that made her wolf respond with uncomfortable intensity. The mate bond was stronger tonight. Full moon amplifying supernatural connections that they'd both been trying to ignore. "You look," Elias began as she approached, then seemed to struggle with appropriate formal language. "Dangerous. You look dangerous." "Good, that's the point." Dina positioned herself beside him, both of them watching the ballroom fill with guests from various packs and political factions. "Any sign of suspicious activity?" "Define suspicious." "Everyone here is technically suspicious. Diplomatic receptions are basically formalized, spying with better wine." Elias's attempt at humor didn't quite mask his underlying tension. But no specific threats identified yet. King Roman made his entrance precisely on time, accompanied by Lord Commander Leonard in a security detail that appeared standard but Diana knew included several specialists chosen specifically for Shadow Corps countermeasures. The king moved through the crowd with practiced political grace, greeting dignitaries and projecting confident authority. He was performing his role in the trap perfectly. "Library detail, reports ready." Gerard's voice came through the concealed communication device in Diana's ear. "No activity at ventilation access points yet." "Acknowledged," she murmured, her response inaudible to anyone not equipped with similar devices. The reception proceeded with formal ritual speeches about diplomatic cooperation, toasts to continued peace, carefully choreographed social interactions that reinforced political hierarchies. To casual observers, it was merely another court function. But Dina watched everything with predatory focus. Every server who moved through the crowd, every guest who positioned themselves near the royal family, every shadow that fell across moonlit windows, waiting for the moment when disguise would fracture and violence would emerge. It came from an unexpected direction. A server young woman, unremarkable appearance, carrying champagne moved toward King Roman's position with the smooth efficiency of professional staff. Nothing obviously wrong except for one detail that Diana's training immediately identified. The woman's weight distribution was wrong. Too balanced, too centered. The posture of someone prepared to move explosively, not the slightly off-balance stance of someone carrying a tray of full glasses. "Server approaching the king from his 6 o'clock, Diana said quietly into her communication device. "Possible, hostile. Confirmed visual," Gerard responded. "Intercept? Not yet. Let her commit." Diana watched the server close distance with Roman, who appeared completely unaware of potential threat, but she could see the subtle shift in Leonard's positioning, the way the nearest guards had adjusted their stance slightly. They'd seen it too. The server was 3 feet from Roman when everything happened simultaneously. Her tray fell champagne glasses shattering across marble floor in explosive distraction. Her hand moved to her waist where a blade had been concealed. And she lunged with the efficient precision of Shadow Corps training, targeting Roman's throat with lethal intent. She never completed the strike. Roman moved with speed that belied his age, deflecting the blade while Leonard's hand closed around the operative's wrist with crushing force. Guards swarmed from multiple directions, securing the attacker before she could deploy any backup weapons or techniques. "Package secured." Leonard's voice came through the communication system, using the code phrase that meant hostile captured. But Deanna's tactical instincts were screaming warnings. "That was too easy," she said to Elias, her voice tight with growing concern. "Shadow Corps operatives don't fail that obviously unless it's a distraction," Elias finished, his own combat instincts recognizing the tactical reality. The explosion came from the eastern wing, a controlled detonation designed more for chaos than casualties. Alarms began blaring. Guests started panicking. The careful organization of the reception dissolved into confused crowds, all trying to exit simultaneously. Perfect conditions for additional attacks in the chaos. "All units respond." Captain Aaron's voice cut through the communication system. "Eastern wing explosion. Multiple fires. Evacuate non-essential personnel. Primary targets maintain security protocols." Dina grabbed Elias's arm as he started moving toward the commotion. "No. That's what they want us separated. Security fractured. Everyone responding to obvious threats while the real attack comes from unexpected angles. My father is surrounded by guards who know the plan. We maintain position and watch for the secondary attack." As if summoned by her words, the ballroom's massive chandeliers suddenly went dark. Emergency lighting kicked in seconds later, but those seconds of darkness were tactically significant. Deanna's enhanced night vision caught movement, a figure dropping from the ventilation grate in the ceiling, targeting her position with focused intent. The operative who'd been assigned to eliminate her was making their attempt during the engineered chaos. She moved on pure instinct, deflecting the initial strike, redirecting momentum, using the operative's own speed against them. They exchanged a rapid sequence of attacks and counters, both fighters operating at levels that made the surrounding chaos seem to move in slow motion by comparison. The operative was good, possibly better trained than Deanna had been at the same stage. But they made a critical error. They expected her to fight defensively, to prioritize survival over engagement. Instead, Deanna attacked. A strike to the operative's knee disrupted their stance. A follow-up to their shoulder separated the joint, and a final movement that brought them face down on the marble floor with Deanna's hand positioned at the base of their skull in the same restraint she'd used on Prince Elias days earlier. "Got mine," she reported through the communication device, breathing hard from exertion. "Hostile secured. Status on other primaries? King's attacker neutralized," Leonard responded. "Prince Elias." "I'm fine," Elias said from beside her, having engaged his own opponent during Deanna's fight. His attacker lay unconscious against a nearby pillar, the prince standing over them with bruised knuckles and satisfied expression. "Operative down. All 3 primary targets secure," Gerard confirmed. Explosion was contained to empty storage area designed for distraction, not casualties. "We have 4 hostiles in custody total." The operation had worked. They'd forced the embedded operatives to reveal themselves and captured them alive for interrogation. But as palace guards moved to secure the captured operatives and restore order, Deanna felt her wolf stir with warning. Something was wrong. The attack had been too coordinated, too professional to be just desperate operatives forced into premature action. "This wasn't panic," she said slowly, realization crystallizing. "This was a test. They wanted to see our response protocols, identify our security measures, map our tactical capabilities. For what purpose?" Elias asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "For the real attack," a new voice said from the ballroom's upper gallery. Every head turned toward the speaker. Commander Luella stood in the shadows of the gallery's balcony, her appearance unchanged from Deanna's memories except for gray that now streaked her dark hair. She wore tactical gear that marked her as operative rather than administrator, and her stance communicated absolute confidence. "Hello, Dina," Luella said, her voice carrying easily across the now silent ballroom. "I've missed you. Did you really think a few captured operatives and some clever security theater would end this?" "Secure the king," Leonard commanded immediately, guards forming protective barrier around Roman. But Luella laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or humor. "Oh, I'm not here for the king, not primarily anyway. I'm here for my wayward asset who decided that betrayal was preferable to loyalty." She began descending the gallery stairs with measured steps, and Deanna could see movement in the shadows behind her. More operatives, precise number unclear, in the dim emergency lighting. "You trained us to survive, Commander," Deanna called out, her voice steady despite adrenaline flooding her system. "You taught us to recognize when our handlers had become more dangerous than our targets. I'm just applying the lessons you drilled into us." "Survival is acceptable," Luella replied, reaching the ballroom floor. "Betrayal is not. You've exposed classified operations, compromised my network, and turned my own operatives against me. That requires consequences." "Then come deliver them yourself," Dina challenged, moving away from the crowd to create engagement space. "Stop hiding behind operatives you view as disposable and face someone who knows all your techniques." It was tactically stupid, deliberately provoking a fight against someone who had trained her, but strategically sound, keeping Luella's attention focused on personal vendetta rather than broader targets. Luella's smile was cold and predatory. "I taught you everything you know, child, but not everything I know. Let me demonstrate the difference." She moved with speed that shouldn't have been possible for someone her age, closing the distance between them in heartbeats. Dina barely deflected the first strike, immediately recognizing that Luella had been holding back during training. This was her actual combat capability refined through decades of real operations, enhanced by experience that no amount of training could replicate. They engaged in a brutal exchange that sent both fighters across the ballroom floor, using pillars and furniture as tactical elements. Luella's experience showed in every movement she anticipated Dina's counters before they fully developed, exploited openings that appeared for fractions of seconds, maintained pressure that prevented any recovery time. Dina was fighting for her life against the woman who'd created her, and she was losing. A strike got through her defense, sending her crashing into a marble pillar hard enough to crack the stone. Pain exploded through her ribs despite supernatural healing. Another strike targeted her throat. She deflected but felt tendon strain from the impact. "You were my best student," Luella said, circling like a predator. "But students never surpass their masters. That's the fundamental truth you failed to learn." "Maybe," Dina gasped, buying time for her healing to address the worst damage. "Or maybe you're fighting the student I used to be, not the operative I became after 7 years of survival against people you sent to kill me." She attacked differently this time, not with the techniques Luella had taught, but with adaptations she'd developed while running and hiding, street fighting mixed with formal training. Desperation tactics combined with strategic precision. The improvised combat style of someone who'd learned that survival mattered more than technique. It disrupted Luella's rhythm, created openings where none should exist, and for the first time since the engagement began, put the commander on defensive. But before Deanna could press the advantage, one of Luella's backup operatives moved to intervene, targeting Deanna from her blind side with lethal intent. The operative never completed the strike. Prince Elias intercepted with explosive force, his wolf fully ascendant under full moon pull. He fought with raw alpha power rather than refined technique, but the result was devastatingly effective. The operative went down hard, and Elias positioned himself at Dina's side, presenting unified front against remaining threats. "I believe," Elias said, his voice carrying the particular resonance of wolf just beneath human surface, "that you're outnumbered, Commander. My father has 50 guards in this palace. You have maybe 10 operatives total. Do the mathematics." Luella's expression shifted recognition that the tactical situation had turned against her. But instead of retreat or surrender, she smiled. "Mathematics indeed, Prince." She raised her hand in signal, and the remaining operatives withdrew toward prepared exit routes with coordinated precision. "But consider this equation. I've identified your defensive capabilities, mapped your security protocols, and confirmed that the Lunar Kingdom is harboring evidence that could expose operations spanning multiple governments. How long do you think before other interested parties decide that eliminating everyone with knowledge becomes preferable to risking exposure?" She backed toward the gallery stairs, maintaining visual contact. "This isn't over, Deanna. It's merely relocated. And next time, I won't be operating alone. I'll have the resources of every corrupt official in 3 kingdoms who has something to lose if you keep talking." Then she was gone, disappearing into shadows with her remaining operatives, leaving chaos and unanswered questions in her wake. As palace guards secured the perimeter and medical personnel began treating wounded, Deanna stood beside Elias and processed the tactical reality. They'd won the immediate engagement, captured several operatives, survived assassination attempts. But they'd also revealed their full defensive capabilities to an enemy who would adapt and return with greater force. The war was far from over. It had merely entered a new, more dangerous phase. Chapter 10. The Master Faces Her Student. The war room had become Dina's second home over the 3 days following the diplomatic reception attack. Maps covered every available surface. Intelligence reports stacked in organized chaos. Communication intercepts played on loop, while analysts searched for patterns. The conspiracy that had seemed containable when it was just Shadow Corps operatives had metastasized into something far more complex, a network spanning multiple pack governments, all with vested interest in ensuring certain truths remained buried. We've confirmed connections to at least 7 high-ranking officials across 3 kingdoms, Lord Commander Leonard said, updating the tactical board with new information. All of them profited from the weapons deals during the border conflicts. All of them have the resources to fund continued operations against anyone threatening exposure. King Roman studied the board with the focused intensity of someone who'd spent decades navigating political treachery. Which means we're no longer dealing with rogue operatives, but with coordinated political opposition backed by substantial resources. And Commander Luella is coordinating their response, Deanna added, her voice flat from exhaustion and too much coffee. She's leveraging their fear of exposure to fund a campaign that serves her personal vendetta against me while advancing their collective interest in silencing witnesses. So we need to eliminate either the conspiracy or the coordinator, Gerard said bluntly. Preferably both. Easier said than executed, Captain Aaron muttered, examining security protocols that had been updated 3 times in as many days. Luella knows our defensive capabilities now. She won't make the same mistakes twice. Prince Elias had barely left Deanna's side since the attack, his protective instinct warring with his understanding that she needed space to work. Now he leaned against the wall near her position, his expression troubled. There's another option, he said quietly. We go public. Release everything we know about the conspiracy, the weapons deals, the Shadow Corps terminations. Make it too expensive for these officials to continue the cover-up. That would trigger exactly the response Luella predicted. Leonard countered. Desperate people with resources become extremely dangerous. They'd move to eliminate all witnesses before the information could be verified. We're already targets, Dina pointed out. Going public might actually provide protection by making our deaths too suspicious to explain away. Roman shook his head. Public exposure without concrete proof would be dismissed as political maneuvering. We need irrefutable evidence, preferably from sources that can't be discredited. Like captured Shadow Corps operatives willing to provide testimony, Lara said from her position near the door. She'd been granted provisional freedom in exchange for cooperation, though guards still maintained discreet surveillance. The 4 we captured during the reception, plus the 2 from my team, that's 6 operatives who can corroborate the program's existence and its termination protocols. If they're willing to testify, Gerard noted. Turning on your former commander requires significant motivation beyond just survival. Then we provide that motivation, Deanna said, an idea crystallizing. We offer them what Luella never did: choice. The choice to stop being weapons, to have identities and futures that aren't defined by who they were trained to kill. She moved to the communications console, making a decision that would either end the threat or escalate it beyond control. I want to speak with all 6 captured operatives simultaneously. No guards present, just me and them. A conversation between former Shadow Corps members about what comes next. Absolutely not, Elias said immediately. You'd be alone with 6 trained assassins in an unsecured environment. I'd be alone with 6 women who are tired of being told they're nothing more than disposable assets, Deanna corrected. There's a difference. The prince has a point, Leonard said carefully. The risk is substantial. So is the potential benefit. If I can convince them to cooperate fully, provide detailed testimony about the conspiracy, we'll have the evidence needed to go public with credible witnesses. Deanna met Roman's gaze directly. And if they decide to kill me instead, well, that tells us something important about their actual willingness to change. The king studied her for a long moment, weighing risks against necessity. You'll have guards positioned outside the room, prepared for immediate intervention. Acceptable. And you'll wear a tracking device that monitors your vital signs. Any indication of violence and we breach immediately. Also acceptable. Roman nodded slowly. Then make your proposal, Miss Deanna. But understand that if this goes wrong, we lose both a valuable intelligence asset and any leverage we had with the captured operatives. I understand, Your Majesty. 40 minutes later, Deanna sat at a conference table with 6 women who'd once been her sisters in the most dysfunctional family imaginable. Lara, she knew. The other 5 she'd never met, different training cohorts, different operational assignments, different paths that had all led to this room where they would decide whether to remain weapons or become something else. I'm Deanna, she said simply, using the name they'd all recognized from Shadow Corps records. 7 years ago, I refused an assignment and went into hiding. You all know what happened to operatives who refused orders. They disappeared, were eliminated, became training statistics in a program that officially didn't exist. She met each woman's eyes in turn. I survived because I recognized that the people who trained us viewed us as disposable, that our lives mattered less than their operational security, and I decided that surviving mattered more than following orders from people who would kill me the moment I became inconvenient. One of the operatives, Isla, according to the briefing file, spoke first. Why should we believe you're any different? You turned on Shadow Corps, joined with the people we were trained to view as targets, and now you're asking us to betray the only structure we've ever known. How is that not just trading one handler for another? Because I'm not asking you to trade handlers, Deanna replied. I'm asking you to stop having handlers at all. To make your own decisions about who you are and what you do with the skills you were forced to develop. Pretty words, another operative, Peggy, said skeptically. But the reality is that we're prisoners who'll be executed or imprisoned for life once we're no longer useful. Why should we cooperate with that outcome? You're prisoners because you came here to kill people on Commander Luella's orders, Deanna said bluntly. But King Roman has offered full pardons, new identities, and relocation support to anyone who provides testimony about the Shadow Corps program and the conspiracy it served. That's not trading handlers, that's offering you the chance to actually disappear instead of just hiding until someone finds and kills you. And if we refuse? Isla asked. Then you'll be prosecuted for attempted assassination of royalty, and you'll spend the rest of your lives in prison. Or Luella will decide your liabilities and eliminate you before you can testify. Either way, refusing cooperation doesn't improve your situation. Lara spoke for the first time since the meeting began. She's telling the truth. I've been working with King Roman's people for 3 days, providing intelligence about Shadow Corps operations. And instead of treating me like a prisoner, they've treated me like someone whose expertise is valuable, someone whose opinion matters. Because you're useful to them, Peggy countered. Once the conspiracy is exposed and Luella is captured, what happens to us then? Do you really believe they'll honor promises made to Omega assassins? I believe King Roman honors his word because his reputation depends on it, Deanna said. But more importantly, I believe that staying with Luella guarantees death, while cooperating at least offers a chance at life. And after everything we've survived, don't we deserve a chance? The silence that followed was heavy with decision weight. Finally, one of the quieter operatives, Eula, spoke. What would cooperation actually look like? What would they want from us? Detailed testimony about Shadow Corps training, operations, and termination protocols. Names of officials who benefited from the conspiracy. Financial records if you have access to them. Anything that helps build an irrefutable case that can be made public without being dismissed as political maneuvering. That's asking us to betray everyone we've ever worked with, Isla said. That's asking you to stop protecting people who murdered your sisters, Deanna corrected sharply. How many of our training cohort are still alive? 12 graduated from the program. I'm alive because I ran. Lara's alive because she refused a termination order. How many of the other 10 are left? The number hung in the air. Unspoken but understood. None. None of the other 10 had survived. Luella eliminated them, Lara said quietly. Systematically, over 5 years. Made it look like mission failures or training accidents. But we all knew the pattern. We just didn't acknowledge it because acknowledging it meant accepting that we were next. So the question, Deanna said, her voice softer now, is whether you want to keep serving someone who views you as disposable assets to be eliminated when convenient, or whether you want to help ensure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else. The decision took another long silence. Then, one by one, the operatives nodded agreement. "I'll testify," Eula said first. "Me too," Peggy added, though her expression suggested reluctance. The others followed Eula last, her agreement coming with visible internal struggle. But ultimately, survival instinct won over misplaced loyalty. "All right," Deanna said, feeling tension she hadn't acknowledged releasing slightly. "Then let's figure out how to build a case that brings down a conspiracy and puts Commander Luella away permanently." The next 72 hours were a blur of testimony, verification, and legal coordination. The 6 operatives provided detailed accounts that corroborated everything Deanna had claimed. Financial records were traced, connecting weapons deals to specific officials. Communication intercepts were analyzed, revealing coordination between Luella and her political backers. By the time they finished, the evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. King Roman held a press conference that sent shockwaves through multiple pack governments. He announced the exposure of a conspiracy involving weapons trafficking, unauthorized military programs, and systematic elimination of witnesses, named names, provided evidence, demanded accountability. The political fallout was immediate and devastating for those implicated. 3 high-ranking officials resigned within hours. 2 more were arrested on treason charges. Financial assets were frozen. Investigations launched across multiple jurisdictions. And Commander Luella, recognizing that her network had collapsed and her political protection had evaporated, went to ground. But Deanna knew she hadn't given up. Women like Luella didn't surrender, they adapted. The question was when and how she would strike next. The answer came 2 weeks later, delivered not through violence but through a simple message left at the palace gates. A note, addressed to Deanna, containing a single line: "Students who survive long enough eventually surpass their masters. Prove you've learned that lesson. Come alone or civilians die. You know where to find me." Coordinates were included: a location in the mountains north of the capital where Shadow Corps had conducted advanced training exercises, neutral ground, personal challenge, final resolution. Deanna sat in her quarters, reading the message for the 5th time while Prince Elias paced like a caged wolf. "It's obviously a trap," he said, stating what they both knew. "She wants you isolated, away from support, in terrain where she has every advantage." "Obviously," Deanna agreed. "So you're not seriously considering going?" "I'm absolutely going." Deanna met his incredulous stare calmly. "Luella won't stop until one of us is dead. She's made this personal, which means it ends personally. And if I don't go, she'll start targeting civilians to force the confrontation. I can't allow that." "Then I'm coming with you." "No, Deanna. This isn't negotiable, Elias." She rose from her chair, moving to stand directly in front of him. "Your presence would escalate the situation from personal combat to political incident." Luella specified, "I come alone for a reason. She wants this to be between former operative and former commander, not between assassin and crown prince." "I don't care what she wants. I care about keeping you alive." Elias's hands closed gently on her shoulders, his golden eyes intense with emotion he was no longer trying to hide. "The mate bond isn't something I can ignore anymore. My wolf has claimed you. I've claimed you, whether or not you're ready to acknowledge that, and I'm not letting you walk into a trap alone." Deanna felt her own wolf respond to his declaration, the bond pulling tighter despite her attempts to maintain professional distance. The full moon had passed, but the connection remained stronger now, more insistent. "I'm not asking permission," she said quietly. "I'm telling you what's going to happen. I'm going to meet Luella. I'm going to end this threat permanently. And then, assuming I survive, we're going to have a very long conversation about mate bonds and what comes next. And if you don't survive, then you'll be free to find a mate who isn't a supposedly dead Omega operative with more enemies than assets." Deanna's attempt at humor fell flat. "But I don't plan on dying, Elias. I've spent 7 years surviving against people trained to kill me. Luella is good, but she's not invincible. Neither are you. No. But I'm angry, motivated, and fighting for a future where I don't have to keep looking over my shoulder. That counts for something." Elias pulled her closer, his embrace careful but possessive. "When you come back, and you will come back, we're completing the mate bond. No more deflecting or postponing or pretending it doesn't exist. Agreed? Dina allowed herself a moment to lean into his warmth, to acknowledge what her wolf had known from their first confrontation. Then she stepped back, putting professional distance between them. When I come back, she said firmly, we'll negotiate. I'm not promising anything beyond that. I'll take it. Elias's smile was brief but genuine. But you should know that my wolf is very persistent, and royal alphas are accustomed to getting what they want. Then your wolf is about to learn an important lesson about Omega assassins who don't follow expected hierarchies. 24 hours later, Deanna stood in a mountain clearing, where snow still clung to shadowed areas despite spring's arrival. The location was exactly as she remembered from training: rocky terrain, limited cover, multiple elevation changes that could be exploited tactically. Commander Luella waited in the center of the clearing, alone as promised, her stance relaxed but ready. You came, Luella said as Deanna approached. I wasn't certain you would. The smart tactical choice would have been to ignore my challenge and let time erode my resources until capture became inevitable. I'm tired of tactical choices, Deanna replied, stopping at the distance that marked engagement range. I'm ready for final resolutions. As am I. Luella's expression held something that might have been respect. You've grown, Deanna. Become more than I trained you to be. That's rare. Most operatives either die or stagnate, but you evolved. Because I had to. Because you tried to kill me for refusing an assignment. I tried to kill you because you became a liability, Luella corrected. Nothing personal, just operational necessity. You eliminated our sisters. Women you trained, who trusted you. How was that operational necessity? They knew too much about activities that needed to remain buried. The program was discontinued. The political landscape changed. And maintaining operational security required reducing potential exposure points. Luella's tone remained clinical, as if discussing tactical theory rather than systematic murder. You, of all people, should understand the mathematics of acceptable losses. I understand that you view people as assets to be expended when convenient, Deanna said. And I understand that I'm tired of living in a world where women like us are created and destroyed based on someone else's convenience. Then what do you propose? That we simply stop? Pretend we're not what we were trained to be? Luella shook her head. We're weapons, Deanna. That doesn't change just because you've spent a few weeks playing house with the royal family. We're people who were turned into weapons. There's a difference, and I'm going to prove it by doing something you never taught me, which is choosing mercy over efficiency. Deanna attacked. The fight that followed was brutal, technical, and personal in ways that combat rarely achieved. Every strike carried years of training, trauma, and conflicting emotion. Luella fought with the refined precision of someone who'd spent decades perfecting lethal technique. Dina fought with the desperate innovation of someone who'd learned that survival required breaking rules. They moved across the clearing, using terrain and elevation, exchanging positions and advantages in fluid sequence. Blood marked snow. Breathing grew labored. Injuries accumulated despite supernatural healing. Luella was better trained, more experienced, technically superior in almost every measurable way. But Dina had something Luella didn't. A reason to live beyond just survival. The defining moment came when Luella overcommitted to a strike that should have been lethal, the killing blow that would end the engagement decisively. Dina recognized the pattern because she'd drilled it thousands of times during training. But instead of the expected defensive counter, she moved inside the strike's arc, accepting a glancing blow in exchange for position. Her hand closed on Luella's wrist. Her foot swept the commander's base. And suddenly their positions were reversed, Luella on the ground, Deanna positioned for the final strike that would end the threat permanently. The strike didn't fall. I could kill you, Deanna said, breathing hard, her hand positioned at Luella's throat. You're helpless. One movement and this ends. That's what you trained me to do, eliminate threats efficiently. Then do it, Luella said calmly, no fear in her expression. Prove you learned the lessons I taught. No, because the most important lesson I learned was one you never intended to teach. Deanna stepped back, releasing the killing position. That being a weapon is a choice, not an identity. That mercy can be stronger than efficiency. and that I don't have to become what you tried to make me." She signaled toward the tree line where Gerard and a security team had been positioned, despite her promise to come alone. Palace guards emerged, moving to secure Luella with restraints designed for supernaturally strong prisoners. "You think this changes anything?" Luella asked as guards lifted her from the snow. "You think letting me live makes you better than me?" "No. But it makes me different. And right now, that's enough." As Luella was escorted away to face trial for conspiracy, treason, and multiple murders, Deanna stood alone in the clearing and felt something she hadn't experienced in 7 years. Freedom. Not from danger, there would always be danger. Not from consequences. She'd carry the weight of what she'd done and what had been done to her for the rest of her life. But freedom from being defined entirely by survival. Freedom to choose what came next rather than just reacting to threats. Freedom to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, she deserved more than just staying alive. She pulled out her communication device and sent a simple message to Prince Elias. "It's over. I'm coming home." The response came immediately. "We'll be waiting, and we're having that conversation about mate bonds. No more delays." Deanna smiled, genuine, unforced, and started the long walk back to the palace. Back to complications and political intrigue, and the terrifying prospect of actually building a life rather than just surviving. Back to a prince whose wolf had claimed an Omega assassin despite every logical reason why that was a terrible idea. Back to possibilities that scared her more than any assassination attempt ever had. But as she walked, her wolf stirred with contentment for the first time in years. Sometimes the most dangerous battles weren't against external enemies, but against the belief that you didn't deserve anything beyond survival. And sometimes winning meant accepting that you were worth fighting for, especially when you'd been trained to believe you were disposable. The war was over. The complicated, messy, terrifying work of actually living was just beginning. Epilogue. 6 months later, the palace gardens hosted a private ceremony that would have been scandalous if anyone outside the immediate participants had known about it. An Omega and an Alpha prince, completing a mate bond that violated every social hierarchy the pack system had established. Deanna wore blue silk practical elegance that allowed movement while meeting ceremonial requirements. Elias wore formal attire that somehow made him look both princely and approachably human. King Roman officiated, his expression suggesting complicated feelings about his heir claiming a mate who could kill most of the palace guard without breaking a sweat. The former Shadow Corps operatives attended Lara, Peggy, Eula, Ela, and the others who'd chosen cooperation over continued service to a conspiracy. They'd been granted pardons, new identities, and the support needed to build actual lives. Gerard stood as witness, his friendship with Deanna having evolved from security professional to genuine ally. The ceremony was brief, the vows traditional, the outcome inevitable from the moment their wolves had recognized each other in a nightclub confrontation that seemed like years rather than months ago. When it concluded and Elias kissed his new mate with enthusiasm that made several observers look away diplomatically, Deanna felt her wolf settle into contentment that had once seemed impossible. "So," Elias murmured against her lips, "was it worth the wait?" "Ask me again in a few decades," Deanna replied. But her smile undercut the deflection. "After we've survived the political scandal, the social upheaval, and your father's pointed reminders that the crown prince probably shouldn't have mated an ex-assassin, he'll adjust. Eventually. Maybe." Elias pulled her closer, his embrace possessive but gentle. "And if he doesn't, well, I'm already planning our escape route to a remote cabin where we can ignore politics entirely." "You'd be terrible at cabin isolation. You need people to order around and kingdoms to manage. Then I suppose we'll have to find a way to make this work in the real world." "I suppose we will." As the small gathering moved to celebration and the political complications of their choice faded temporarily into background noise, Deanna reflected on the strange journey from tavern server to mate of the crown prince. She'd been trained to be a weapon, had become a survivor, and now was learning to be simply herself, complicated, damaged, but finally free to choose her own path. Sometimes the most dangerous predator in any room really was the one who'd learned to hide in plain sight. But sometimes that predator just wanted to stop hunting and start living. And that, Deanna decided, was the most revolutionary choice of all. Dear viewers, as we reach the end of Deanna's journey from weapon to woman, from shadow to light, I want to ask you something. What would you do if you discovered the person serving you coffee every morning was secretly the most dangerous person in the room? Would you have seen the signs Prince Elias missed? Or would you have underestimated them too? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please like this video. It helps more people discover stories like Diana's. Until tomorrow, when another secret unfolds.